man stroked a cat he called Nick, told the animal his life was boring and full of nonsense, then finally saw hope for the future, and with his magic and trading skills he can get anything. He will reveal himself. A massive paw appeared behind him. Grabbing the cat, he held it in his arms and screamed in fury. In this other world, he will prove what he can do. Later, a wagon sat in the middle of the forest, a single horse pulling a cart with 2 passengers, surrounded by riders on horseback and people on foot, and one girl shuddered. Someone else called her name. It was Karina. Pulling back her hood, she muttered that it felt strange. After his parents died, the grandfather who raised him also died, and he believes he will be alone for the rest of his life. The funeral and other memorials ended 2 hours ago, and he lay on the bed looking at his phone and said he was surprised 10 days had passed since his death. He checked the selection results notification that said Kawakado's Human Resources Department thanked him for choosing their company and, after careful selection, would not be able to hire him. After reading the message, he threw the phone and kept staring at the ceiling, remembering people had told him that if they did not return the scholarship, he would have to find a job. They are grateful for the money, because otherwise they could not have gone to university. People told him to get a regular job instead of chasing dreams he did not have. Everyone talked about the future, but they were already living their dreams, and he believed that a job at a good company would please his grandfather, yet the room felt oppressive. A cat suddenly jumped onto the man, and he began stroking it, saying it was the only one he had. Despite his mood, he had nowhere to go, and after lunch he has to go look for a job. The box on his bed came to mind. Inside were 3 old rings. He picked them up and examined them carefully. Finally, he tried one on, and it fit perfectly. A cat snatched a ring from the box in its teeth. The man shouted at Nick not to touch the rings. The ring on the man's finger and the one in the cat's mouth accidentally connected. Suddenly, a bright light filled the room. By then, he had opened his eyes to a blinding light and saw they were on a mountain peak, confused about what was happening and wondering if it was a dream. Looking around, he saw only vast mountains and open fields. He didn't know where he was or how he got here. The cat came up to him and he picked him up, holding him tightly. Lying on the bed, hungry and unsure how he had ended up there or what he had done, he noticed a missing ornament and decided the rings were to blame. The rings didn't transfer to the man's finger or to the cat's, but he clearly remembers her putting one on her finger, and I couldn't just lose it like that, so there may be a connection between the rings and his being here. That might be why he's here. This isn't like manga or anime. I can't tell if it's really another world. A sound came from the side, and he realized he was barefoot. Ending up in another world meant he must have some cheat ability. He prayed to God that it was true. He shouted across the neighborhood to open his status screen, but when he opened his eyes, there was nothing in front of him. Clearly, he was stuck there. A cat came up and licked his face. The man turned to him, said he did not care at all, and then noticed his cat was floating in the air. Falling to the ground in terror, his eyes bulged. He screamed at the cat, demanding to know how it learned to fly. He wondered whether the cheat had gone to the cat instead of him. The cat landed on his head. Lying on the field, he said everything was bad and he couldn't survive there. Then he thought it over. Nick has a cheating ability, but that's not all, so we need to find out what else he can do. A window appeared before him like in video games, showing Nick's statistics though it hadn't appeared earlier, and the table was written in the name of Daiichi Asakura, who had the magic of a homeless man and a special skill of sharing and evaluation. Those were his stats after all. He also has an ability to cheat but doesn't understand what the exchange is. The assessment is satisfied, a classic cheating ability. With the cat hovering around him, he tested his assessment skills and discovered it possessed spiritual magic of earth, water, fire, and wind, so he admitted the cat was cooler than he was. His cheating skill became his income. Returning to Japan would leave him alone for the rest of his life, so he must work hard to survive in this world. First, he needs to find out what the assessment can do. Walking through the field, he reached the edge of the forest. Pressing his palm to a trunk, he put his skill to work. He learned the leaf was 5 centimeters wide, the branch 8 meters long. There were many leaves, and the height was 40 meters. Thinking the test had worked, the window lit up in front of him again, so he pressed the button and the tree disappeared, and he hit his head hard in confusion while finding the exchange ability impressive. At that moment, his cat went berserk, and the man had to let him go while apologizing to the animal. Looking at the cat, he told it to move aside, then used his ability on a nearby tree, which evaporated instantly. The cat approached the hole left by the tree and sniffed it. The man asked if he was surprised and told him to look at the table. The man used his magic again, and a tree reappeared where the pit had been. The cat jumped back. The cat hissed in fear, and the man pleaded for forgiveness, telling the other not to get angry. Now he must seriously test his abilities. The saved tree stayed in his inventory, and he could exchange it for points. he realized he needed to buy shoes. A check showed the system allowed that purchase. Soon after selling the tree, he had enough money for the purchase and managed to trade his glasses for new sneakers, and the exchange feature turned out to be really useful. He can now not only survive but also become wealthy, and his future looks brighter as his motivation has grown. He began collecting everything he saw into his inventory, from a large tree to a big stone, and the list of items he kept became huge. Using the money he had, he bought a chainsaw. It was expensive, but price did not stop him and he decided to take it. For now, just to test it, he was hungry anyway. Suddenly his cat looked away and started hissing, and he asked the cat what was wrong. Noises came from the forest. A huge black tiger was coming straight toward them. Believing he was a cutie, the man faced the beast's growl and fell to the ground with his fifth point. He tried to use his storage ability on the animals. It didn't work. He couldn't store birds or insects when he put the trees into the internal storage. He doesn't know how it all works, but apart from plants, it won't accept other living things. With nothing and no weapons, he must at least scare the tiger away. He decided he had to strike first and kill without giving it a chance to fight back. He told himself to stay calm. The tiger is still at a distance. So far, everything is fine. Keep your distance. He needs at least 100 meters to open the vault on time. Testing his abilities was not in vain. His cat kept hissing as the tiger moved toward them. The man reassured him that everything would be fine. The man waited until the beast was as close as it could get, then used his storage to create a huge pit beneath the tiger, and the beast fell in. Using his abilities, he made a huge shipping container filled with liquid nitrogen appear in the pit, and the tiger fell into it, clawing at the container walls. At last he decided he had succeeded and asked the cat what it thought of his idea. It seemed easy to him, but the cat suddenly looked away. Right away someone climbed out of the pit, and it was a tiger that was still alive. Panic hit him. He clearly needed a weapon. Then his cat used his powers against the beast. Water bullets formed by Nick's spiritual magic looked more like armor-piercing shells. The tiger had nothing to do with it. He kept advancing on them while the man checked his inventory for something to help. The man decided to build a wall. He waited again until the tiger came close enough and used his strength. With nowhere to run, he braced for the tiger's attack, knowing it would be the end. The tiger moved oddly, and the man thought something was wrong with it. His last chance came. He pulled a stone from his inventory, and it struck the animal. That was the end, but he tried to save the defeated one to the inventory, just in case, and succeeded. First, he set traps and bought food, weapons, and tools. I bought a drone and watched what was happening through it. Through its camera, he saw a large expedition of people. The sharing feature felt too cheesy even for him. He stroked his cat while it ate, telling it that it was time for the first contact. A short time later, 2 members of the expedition rode horses across a field. One of them spotted a man with a cat sitting on a rock ahead. The man greeted them. When asked if he was traveling alone, he said they were traveling with their animals. The girl was surprised to see the cat. He asked whether people saw them so rarely. She said that happened quite often, but never with such a long coat. He introduced himself as a Sakura Daichi and said his cat's name. The girl took off her hood and said my name was Alicia Hartland. The guy, taken by her beauty, looked embarrassed, but I thought sharply to myself that she looked like a schoolgirl. The second girl on the horse looked at me strangely. The guy said that if she wanted to pet him, she could do it. When her partner put the sword between them, she wanted to reach out to him. She told Alicia to move away, then apologized. The girl with the sword looked at the man and asked if he was really alone. He claimed to be a merchant, saying he left the village to become a novice trader, and that was a story he made up about himself. Then he began showing all the goods he had collected. The small bag holds quite a lot. He carries many useful items, including a flashlight. The girls stared at him in amazement. They had never seen anything like this before. Holding her sword, the girl asked whether he had taken the magic item from the vault, but the other woman saw that was not true and felt no magic from the glowing instrument. He assumed that since they were talking about it, a storage room and magic tools still existed, so statistics were magic. He set the lantern on the ground, nudged it so it rolled toward them, and told them they could take it. One girl took it, held it to her face, and insisted it was definitely not a magic tool, while the other could not believe it. He asked if they were traveling together, and the girl with a ball replied that she was accompanying the other girl. Feeling scared, he said that if they did not mind, he would like to go with them to the nearest town or village, and he asked for the other girl's name. The first one looked harmless. She said a bad person probably wouldn't ask them to do this. The defense attorney said he was still suspicious. He offered to put his weapon away if she was worried, but it would be pointless to stow a weapon that can't be used, and from the look of his hands, he doesn't know how to use a bow or a knife. The friendly man laughed and said she had figured him out. Though confused, the girl agreed to escort him to the main merchant. He was pleased and thanked the beautiful girls for their help. At that moment, the cat jumped from his arms straight into Alicia's, and she stroked him admiringly, saying how cute he was. Still holding his hand out for a handshake, the man was clearly ignored, so he turned to the guard behind him, kept his hand extended, and thanked her for her help. She said she would take him to the main merchant, but asked me to stay at least 1 meter away. The magician must not be allowed to get that close to them. He asked what kind of magician she meant, and she told him not to pretend he was traveling alone or lacked combat skills. At that moment, he understood what she meant and was reminded to go with them but keep his distance. The man said her sword was long enough, and she told him his tone had changed. The guy said without hesitation that nothing was wrong with that because they were the same age. She told him she could talk about what she wanted but must not do anything that would make her attack him. When he asked if he was really that suspicious, she said he was. Behind them, the girl kept walking, her horse chewing on her cloak. Her only focus was the flashlight in her hand. The man turned his head and saw an expedition with many people. One of the carriages stopped, and an older man got out, asking whether he was the one escorted to the city of Karam. The first man placed a hand on his chest and bowed slightly as he gave his name, and the other answered that he was Klaus Bertram, the leader of this caravan and head of the Bertram Company. The man didn't realize how much influence he had, so he stayed polite, admitting his lack of experience, and then another man asked what he could offer in return. A man handed over a bag of unknown contents and said he could sell it to the other man. The man glanced back at his assistant to signal him, and the assistant approached the seller. I take the bag from his hands and hand it to the owner. Opening it, the man was surprised and told the other man he was either very generous or did not know the true price. The other man replied that he probably did not know how much it was worth, this country. The man considered the whole situation. The guy replied that the cost of the goods can vary by place and time. Although it is grown in his country, it remains a rare and valuable commodity. The man replied that he was quite honest. The man said he was a merchant too. Lying won't make things better. The man agreed with that. Everything was going as the man had planned. He thanked the man and said his grandfather had taught him this. The man replied honestly that the product is worth a lot here and probably costs more than in his homeland, then asked how much pepper was in the bag. No country on the continent has been able to grow pepper seeds. It relies entirely on imports, so only aristocrats and the wealthy can use it. Because his product came from another continent, not just another country, and he had no permit, a man stared at him strangely and he flinched, realizing they now knew he wasn't local. He said he immediately thought the man's appearance was odd and that he must have come from another continent, and the other man could only agree, though that might cause them problems. The man thanked me for the warning. The merchant said they still needed to discuss the price of pepper. He asked to wait. He asked if he wanted to buy something else. He was planning to become a merchant in this country, but the man said he was not a native, and since knowledge is needed to live here, the man asked if he could help him. The man claimed he was honest, but the other man only sees the good in people. He just laughed. He can't simply help him become a merchant. In this case, the man asked how much pepper he wanted in return. When the man held up the number on his fingers, the other man thought it was foolish to expect help that easily. He pulled 5 bags of pepper from his backpack, and the merchant said they were not bad. They should treat their trading partner with respect. His grandfather had taught him that, though he had actually read it in a book. Klaus told his servant Lloyd to take the pepper, then turned to Karina. He told her to stay with Alicia and take Mr. Asakura to Karam City. I asked Alicia if she agreed. She approved. The men headed toward the carriage. Offering his hand for a handshake, the man thanked the girls for their help. They bowed. Karina said she would go with him, and the other said she would come too. The girls walked on, ignoring the man's outstretched hand. He asked where they were going and was told to go to Karina's boss. Alicia will tell him everything later. The man asked me to call him Dach and said he doesn't need formality and prefers to be treated like a friend. Embarrassed, she wanted to say she couldn't, but the guy handed the cat right in front of her nose and said it was his partner Nick. The cat seemed to agree and meowed, and her heart melted again. The man and the cat exchanged a look and said he was letting go of his paws. The cat started to fall. The girl grabbed him immediately and began to stroke him. A man approached her, introduced himself as Dach, pointed out she was hugging Nick, smiled, and made her feel embarrassed. Behind her, he walked with a satisfied look as she held him in her arms and he asked if she would go. She agreed. He stepped closer and said he couldn't hear her, clearly teasing, and she screamed again, using the word master. He made a sad face when she finally called him by his first name without formalities, which amused him a lot, but the cat clearly didn't like something. Elsewhere in the camp, tents were pitched everywhere. a merchant sat at a table and asked Lloyd what he thought of the new guy. He replied that he spoke their language too well for a visitor, then nodded and spoke politely. His clean hands showed he had never worked because he grew up in a well-off family and had a good education, and Klaus noticed it too. He asked about the other one, Pepper. The servant said it was probably given as a thank you. He's either the son of a rich man or the stupidest son of an aristocrat. Bertram said he could become a big shot in the future. He can store the product because it is so well preserved. A beautiful, delicious pepper sits on the table. Maybe that was the case. Storage is a rare skill granted by God. The owner can place objects there and they stay stored for a long time. The capacity depends on the owner's magical power. Time stops inside. A magic bag is a bag-shaped storage item that can hold objects. Its internal capacity can be increased but is still limited, and time continues to pass. He thinks about the thing he pretended to pull from the magic bag and how he managed to swim across the sea. Even with storage, he is still young. We need to find out if there are any valuable items in the vault. First, they must learn about this unfamiliar country, and the servant asked whether they would stop being polite to him, but was told there was no need. He needs to warn employees and attendants to be polite to him. A man noticed two men sitting at the tent. One opened a box to reveal an expensive glass decorated with interesting patterns. The hero was surprised that in this world, a glass goblet cost so much, even though the glass was only average quality. Someone outside called to Karina, calling her sister, and a short-haired girl in a headscarf sat by the cauldron asking for help to light the fire, so Karina apologized and said she needed to see someone off. The man wondered why they asked Karina if she was using magic. Later he said he wanted to see her make a fire, and she agreed if that was what he wanted. The girl who had asked for help thanked Karina, said making a fire with flint seemed too difficult, then raised her hand, put her palm near the logs, and the fire flared up. This was spiritual fire magic. The flame ignited the moment she raised her hand. Nick's offensive magic was impressive too, and it's striking how magic appears in everyday life. When he asked whether she always helps start the fires, she said she only does when she's not busy. Then she moved among the same cauldrons with stoves and lit a fire in each of them. Those who can't control fire magic use flint. Alicia said that in such cases magical artifacts are used. He asked whether he had any magical power and whether he could use those artifacts. It turned out he did not. Available professions depend on magic. Stronger magic leads to higher status roles. Those without magic can only use artifacts, but both groups still manage to earn a living. The man recalled his past and asked the girls whether the quality of life depends on magic. Karina called Mr. Asakura. Shuddering, he turned to the girl who had asked for help a few minutes earlier. She looked crestfallen. His eyes widened. Realizing he'd said too much, he covered his mouth with his hand and cursed, then apologized to the girl, and she said it was fine and that she was used to it. Although she has no magical powers, she works at a good company where everyone is kind and helps each other. She was lucky, but she said it sadly. His ability to cheat let him become a merchant, but it turned out to be a selfish mistake. That power could help people without magic. He looked at his hands and thought about it. Shaking the foundations of this world will be interesting. People without magic can live the same as those with magic by using artifacts. If he shares their knowledge, people without magic will treat him well. It's only his imagination, but it gives him plenty of motivation. He called Carrot and handed her a lighter, saying she could use this artifact to light a fire. At the same moment, he showed how it worked by pressing the lighter button that everyone in his world is used to. Everyone was discouraged. Karina said he was so small. This was the first time she had seen such a magical artifact. But their other traveling companion noticed he did not look like him. It was transparent, like a gemstone. The man said it was a lighter and handed it to Carrot, asking her to try it. Her hands began to twitch as she said she could not accept something so expensive. At that moment, the man opened his hand, holding the lighter, and it fell to the ground. Everyone looked at it in shock. Calling her surprisingly strong, he said he would not be angry if even 2 pieces were broken. He told her not to worry and urged her to try to thrust the object into the girl's hands. She lit the dry leaves with the lighter. They caught fire instantly and she threw them into the oven. The logs were singed. She looked at the object with admiration and wondered whether such an incredible artifact really existed. His homeland must be a very fine place. The hero said he wants people in this country who lack magic to be able to use magical artifacts. The girl wondered if he was a foreign trader with such fine tools, and she was sure he would succeed. Holding the lighter in her hands, she was surprised when he refused to take it and let her keep it. He told his teammates to go join them. The girl asked him to wait and said she could not accept that. She grabbed his clothes to stop him, but he kept telling her she was not that expensive. A man called Karina, interrupting them. He asked what she was doing here. Tall and scarred, he wore a knight's chainmail. Karina said he was her boss and that she was just on her way to see him. The hero felt enormous. Karina introduced him as Captain Jeffrey and presented the main character as Collingham Bertram's business partner. Dayashai reached out his hand and said he would go with them to the next city. Jeffrey said he was in charge of Bertram's company's security and escort. Karina said the head told her to keep an eye on this gentleman. The captain responded by ordering her to accompany the two people, and she agreed. The hero wondered whether she was really a security guard and whether she needed an escort again. The captain called Mr. Asakura and told him to go with him. He offered a drink, but the man refused. The girl, who had been given a new object, stood holding a lighter and watched the people leave in surprise. After a hearty lunch, the hero lay comfortably on the tent mattress with his cat on his stomach. The others so impressed by the lighter's plastic, they compared it to a gemstone, and he wondered whether he had gone too far. Someone on the street called out to Mr. Asakura to ask if he was awake. It was Karina, and he said he was. She apologized for arriving so late, but the company head wants to speak with him. The man said he would be there right away. He wonders if his watch looks too suspicious. He tucked them away for now. Putting on his jacket, he wondered if there were any problems. They walked between the tents. Many people were around. The men drinking looked at him. The attention from outside surprised him. Karina led them to a large tent and said they had to be here. A man pushed aside the cloth serving as the entrance and apologized. Inside was the head of the merchants and one of the girls who had accompanied him today. The man pushed his chair back and told the other man to sit. They all sat at the table and he apologized for calling so late in the evening. The hero thought something might have happened. If something is wrong, he can exchange the goods. The merchant said this was not true and that the goods he provided were excellent. Then the other man asked what was wrong. He said a bundle of cloth on the table with something inside. The merchant wanted to talk about the lighter. The man remembered he had given it today. Curate. The merchant held out his palm to avoid any misunderstanding and did not take her away. The girl wanted to ask about a lighter, a magical artifact she had never seen before. A serious-faced man told him he didn't understand its true value. Surprise crossed his face. He had been planning to sell it for household chores. The man said it was an artifact used by aristocrats and wealthy people, and that it might be free in his country, but was extremely expensive in this one. When the hero asked if it was a simple artifact, the man shook his head. People without magic can use it, so it is more valuable than a normal magic tool. The problem is its body. It can be sold for the price of glass or even jewelry, and at that moment, the man remembered passing two men who were talking about expensive glass. Once these items hit the market, some will try to sell them to aristocrats and the wealthy. The man thought it over. If that happens, he could run into trouble. That had not occurred to him. The merchant said he had promised to help him, but it is unclear what he will do now. He thinks he doesn't want to do anything, but talking about it is pointless because he cannot shake the rules of this world. Mentioning the glass goblet again, he said he had already tried selling it to aristocrats and the wealthy, then pulled out a glass rose on a stand from somewhere. Alicia, sitting beside her, spoke aloud in admiration of her beauty. The merchant was surprised too. Seeing their reaction, the man thought he had gone too far. The merchant shouted at someone to stop and take his time. The girls screamed the same. This was the moment. Someone already had a sword at the main character's neck. Karina stood beside him, pointing the sword at the man. The merchant quickly tried to calm down, saying there was no problem and he was just surprised. Karina took the sword from the man and put it back in the scabbard. Bowing her head, she asked for forgiveness. The merchant exhaled, closed his eyes, and asked Mr. Sakura for forgiveness. He blamed himself for raising his voice. The hero then remembered Karina had asked him to stay at least 1 meter away and wondered what that distance meant inside a tent. Seeing the other man remain still with a sword pointed at him, he said he knew she would not hurt him, though it was more likely he had not understood what had happened and so stayed silent. The merchant said if everyone calmed down they could continue the conversation. The hero said Karina was not to blame, so everything was fine. The merchant asked Karina to step aside to avoid embarrassing the guests, and she agreed. The man kept talking about the glass sculpture. Her beauty made every jewel seem dull. The merchant wondered if it was the same glass he usually saw. She appeared fine and beautiful. He reached into his backpack and pulled out many more glass sculptures and lighters like the ones they'd seen earlier. The merchant noticed they even glowed differently. He knows her body is different from the glass they work with, but some will try to sell it at a high price, so he wants to solve the money problem and profit from glass objects by offering a lighter as a bonus. First, a buyer of these costly glass pieces will include a free lighter for everyday use. Then he will distribute them among aristocrats and wealthy people. The merchant asked whether he wanted to distribute lighters in the market. It isn't a good idea, but there's no other option. They will go along with his plan. Smiling, the man asked whether the merchant still agreed to cooperate. The merchant agreed. The man withdrew his hand and thanked him. They sealed their words with a handshake, which was the first step. After they left the tent, Karina knelt before the man and asked forgiveness for what she had done. The other girl said Karina had done nothing wrong, and like the main girl, was surprised and screamed. Daiichi said it was his fault. Surprised, he realized she was only doing her job. He should be the one to apologize. Seeing the girls so upset, the man noticed and thought about the situation. Calling Alicia, he handed her the cat and she melted instantly. He knew it would work, thought it was funny, and said he liked it better when she smiled. She softened and finally smiled. He noticed she was shy too and found her quite cute, which made her even more confused. Karina watched with an unreadable expression. Everyone was staring, and he wondered why. It turned out everyone knew he had given Korit a lighter. He scratched his head and asked if anyone else wanted one. Karina said maybe they wanted to see what kind of person he was and talk to him. Maybe they see him not just as a traitor or a stranger, but also as a hero. Maybe he followed a woman loved by a foreign aristocrat who was concealing his identity. Maybe he was exiled here because he was secretly born into the royal family. Scratching his chin with a thoughtful look, he said she had a pretty good imagination. Karina replied those were their thoughts, not hers. The third said it was generally quite good for everyone here. Screams came from nearer the forest. Men ran from there, begging for help as monsters chased them, and all three stared with wide eyes. A man shouted they were royal monkeys, and that a whole flock was coming, so Karina grabbed her sword and told her companions to hide behind her, as a large number of monsters emerged from the forest ahead. Warriors immediately attacked the monsters and tried to surround them. A projectile from the side struck one monster in the head. Arrows and spears hit them and set some on fire. A bystander on the sidelines asked if they were all right. Karina said they could win and turned back to see what was happening on the battlefield. A shout warned that the monsters had reinforcements from the south of the forest. 10 more monsters appeared. The commander-in-chief tried to rally his warriors by saying they were stronger and had to attack. The main character hesitated. Scratching his chin, he weighed watching against helping and questioned whether it was worth the risk. Glancing at his cat hiding under his clothes, he didn't want to show them all his strength, so he poked Nick's forehead with his finger and told him to hide and not use magic. The man opened his vault and thought about which weapon to take. Karina said it was strange. The royal monkeys are very active today. Karina told Elise to check whether they were hiding in the south of the forest. Daiichi stood apart and watched what was happening, then noticed something moving in the tall grass off to one side and shouted to Karina to be careful because there are royal monkeys on the east side of the field. More people burst out of the grass and ran toward them. They were close and fast, and he needed a weapon of any kind. Just then a monster reached out its claw at him from the side, and Karina arrived in time to pierce him with her sword. 2 of the monsters broke away and moved back toward them, heading straight for Alicia as she cast a spell, and the main character screamed. At that moment he sprang from his seat with such force that earth flew aside as he kicked the monster in the head. He was surprised by what he was doing. The monster turned to the man, and a foot struck his face as the monkey rolled head over heels away, drawing the attention of the others. One of them, stretching her paws toward Alicia, was struck in the forehead and knocked out. The girls watching the scene were shocked by what was happening. The man was sent flying by the force of the blow. The man lay on the ground after colliding with a monster. The girls rushed to him, calling his name. He lifted his head, looked at her, and asked if she was okay. With tears in her eyes, she said yes. Grabbing the man's arms, they tried to lift him to his feet and said they had to leave. At that moment, several monkeys reappeared behind them, and Daiichi and Karina turned to look. The girl swung her sword at one monster as the man kicked again. During the fight, a monster appeared behind Alicia. The man stood there and watched. Alicia looked back and focused on him. At that moment, the monster opened its mouth and moved toward her. Seeing this, Daiichi ran forward and stood between the girl and the monster to stop it. The girl screamed. Karina saw it and called to Mr. Asakura, but she was trying to stop a monster and couldn't help him, so he feared the monsters would kill him at this rate. Trying to convince himself everything was fine, he told himself nothing hurt, and it really didn't. A monster sank its fangs into him, but he felt nothing. He remembered when Alicia could use magic without improvised means. His only aim was to be sure she relied on physical strength and stealth. He realized this was magic without improvised means. At that moment, he noticed a strange movement in the forest before the tiger attacked them, and when the stone hit his head, he felt nothing. Then he will use shamanism, taking a knife from his chest, channeling magic into it, and stabbing the monster. To him, it depended on the situation, like taking a piece of cake with a fork. It was about physical strength and stealth. He saw Karina still struggling, shouted for her to leave the monkey to him, then used force and stealth to slip behind the monster and stab it in the back. The monster stayed upright and kept screaming. The knife was too short to reach his heart. He shouted at Tom not to run away. The knife measured only 23 centimeters. It was only a remark. Pulling out a dagger, he lost his balance and fell backward as the monkey turned to him with an intimidating smile. The man grinned too, and at that moment, Karina swooped in and pierced the monster's neck. He fell dead, splattering his blood over everything nearby, including the girl. She swung the sword sharply to clear the blood from the blade. The girl with blood on her face sighed. The guy was being gently lowered to the ground by magic, but a few centimeters above the ground, they suddenly let him go and he hit the ground. She screamed and ran toward him. The man smiled, gave a thumbs up to show he was okay, stayed on the ground and asked the girls if they were hurt, while the cat that came out from under his jacket sighed. Both women running toward him reached out to help him up. Karina said she should be the one asking about it. The second girl was already ready to say the same, urging him to worry about himself, not them. They were already lifting him up, and he asked what the situation was on the defensive line at the moment. Karina said the number of enemies was dropping, and if it kept up they would win. He wondered if it was worth helping them. Karina sighed, reminding herself it was her job to protect them both, and she remembered when the man was bitten by a monster and felt she had failed, so she clutched the sword at her belt. He noticed it, the defense could not hold against a sudden attack from other directions. The royal monkey's fighting spirit would soon be gone. He asked if she really believed that. He turned toward a sound behind him. I watched as the monsters, frightened by the arriving crowd, ran back into the forest. Karina smiled and pointed at them to prove she was right. The man smiled contentedly because she looked even cuter without the blood on her face. Seeing blood on his palm, he magically produced a towel from his jacket pocket and took it out. Alicia asked me to give it to her. Magically soaking it, she began to wipe the guy's face as he shouted that he was cold and could have done it himself, but she asked to be allowed to do it to her and kept wiping his face carefully. He asked Alicia whether she had used spiritual water magic and whether she intended to apologize, since he already knew she could use that power, which left him confused, and they have magical artifacts and spiritual magic. The spiritual realm has 4 elements. Artifacts need magical power to activate. Magic draws on nature's power. Spiritual power depends on the owner's magic, but artifacts do not. Spiritual magic can be used many times and is stronger. He thought it over and realized that magic in this world is based on 4 elements, and that spiritual magic is stronger than artifact magic, and the girl asked how he could tell it was spiritual magic. He didn't know how to reply to her, so he said it was a courtesy, and she asked him what that meant. In his country, spiritual magic is valued more highly than artifacts, so he concluded it was spiritual magic, and said calling it an artifact would be rude because artifacts are less valued. The girls eyed him with suspicion. Karina said only 20 people in this country can use spiritual magic, and there are about 100 of them on the whole continent. He thought that was not many. Alicia advised him to learn more about the country before starting his business. The guard sighed heavily and said there was no other way out, adding that he would be glad if they told him everything while they traveled. He and the cat thanked them. To show his gratitude for their help, he will sell 2 statuettes bearing their faces. The girls answered at once that they did not need them. The warriors who won the battle shouted with joy. It seems it's already over. The man asked if they could go there together. Karina said there might be injured people there and he could help. When asked if the royal monkeys had attacked, the guard said she had some guesses but needed to check with someone, and she looked at the 2 men sitting on the ground nearby. That suggested spiritual magic might be rare. Since Nick used it, he can call it his artifact and gain the ability to exchange. If someone finds out, there will be problems. It must be used carefully. It won't be easy. Lying in bed, the girl remembered the moment the main character lay on the ground and asked them if they were all right. He seemed quite funny to her. Though he was very kind to her, she had never heard of anyone defeating the royal monkey unarmed, and he did it alone. At times she felt all was lost with the monster looming over her. Then a man stepped in and took the monkey's bite for her, and she wondered why he did it. He looked at her then, smiling. You cannot defeat the royal monkey with a single punch. She still clearly remembers her grandmother telling her about the hero when she was a child. In the tent at that moment, she lay with Karina on separate mattresses. Hiding under the blanket, she turned from side to side. I'm trying not to think about it. He felt no fear of her. Even after he discovered her spiritual magic, his attitude did not change. Unlike the people in her memory, he was kind and smiled at her. She seems to have completely lost her mind and curled up under the blanket. The next day, the group set out again. Karina scolded him because he refused to ride the horse. He had never ridden a horse before. The caravan moved forward. The girls sat in the carriage with him. Not used to it, he shook violently. Karina realized this was the best carriage they could get. The man turned away from them and looked out the window. At that moment, he saw two people on a nearby horse turn away as soon as he looked and realized they were all avoiding his gaze. Karina agreed with him. He has no idea when he became so frightening. Last night he had talked about his preferences at breakfast, and although they stopped talking about the lighter, that wasn't the only cause of the misunderstanding, so he still didn't understand what else seemed strange. They found it was his tent. That tent looked different from the others. Karina said an unusual light was coming from the tent. The man said this was common in his homeland. Karina grabbed his head and told him to warn everyone next time before showing the goods from his homeland. He apologized and said he'd remember it. Karina then asked him to warn the main merchant too. Another girl asked to see the goods and became very interested. Because of that, he can show you his tent. Blushing, she looked away, thinking he was inviting her to his tent that night. The man was shocked. It was supposed to be a romantic comedy, but she is underage, so both characters would have to be adults. He winked and apologized, saying Alicia was too young. She fell into a daze, and Karina said he was rude because Alicia is already 20 years old. The guy jumped up, sure they were joking. It turned out Karina was 19, and they had thought both were older than him. He shouted to everyone that they were not older because he was already 22. Karina was surprised, and Alicia laughed, saying she was a grown man but was acting very strangely. Angry, he banged his fists on the carriage seat and demanded to know whether they thought he was 16 or 17, while the girls tried to soothe him, saying it was a compliment that he looked so young and asking for his forgiveness. Sighing, he said it was fine because he had mixed up their ages too at first. Karina suggested ending the conversation there. A man walked in front of the caravan. I'm spreading pollen on the road to even out the ground. A man saw men with their hands and feet tied, riding in the wagons behind them and thought it cruel, but Karina pointed it out and said they did not deserve sympathy. A 35-person team reportedly entered the forest to catch baby royal monkeys, but only 5 survived. The man asked why they needed the royal monkey cubs. It turned out the cubs are tamed from childhood and used as labor, usually by the army. They wear slave collars. He shuddered because the name sounded terrible to him. He wondered how much they cost. If they were no more than 2 months old, 20 gold coins. If less than 6 months old, 10 gold coins. When he asked whether those men were criminals, the others said it was a delicate matter, but blamed the men for provoking a pack of monkeys. At minimum, those men will have to take responsibility for yesterday's battle. It was a crime. If they cannot pay, they will be forced into slavery by their debt. It turned out that being an adventurer is not profitable at all. Karina smiled because she is an adventurer too. He begged her to forgive him. If you work steadily, it can be very profitable. Bad luck hit them when 2 herds attacked at once. Alicia turned to her and asked whether they had investigated the case thoroughly. They didn't even check whether their team members were still alive, making his world feel strange and very harsh. The carriage wheels spun. The man apologized for acting foolish around those girls. They said they forgave him. The country's culture and customs were very different from his, but they noticed he was still trying, and Karina asked Alicia not to overpraise him. The man set a bag on his lap that the main merchant had given him and asked the girls to rest. From his bag he took out sandwiches and drinks for everyone, handed them to the girls and invited them to try the food, and when they looked very surprised, he reassured them that it was from his country, offered snacks and encouraged them to try food from another culture, saying they should like it. The girls reached out and took gifts from him. They examined the food, turning it over and sniffing it. He told them not to be afraid to speak honestly because he valued their opinion. Karina asked about the magic bag on his lap. It turned out the head merchant had given it to him to hide the vault, which explained why the products were so fresh. Tearing open the package, he froze when someone shouted from the side. Turning toward the voice, he looked out the window. Outside lay the village of Takura, with huge mountains and fields, mills, and other buildings. Turning his head in every direction, he tried to see around. Karina fell in behind him but could not see anything from there. The man said they needed to have lunch as soon as possible. Holding up a bottle, he said it was a water vessel wrapped in a clear sandwich-like package and wanted them to know he does not show it to everyone. Karina told him not to worry, and he thanked her. He asked if that meant they'd rest for about an hour and whether they could walk around the edge of the village. Alicia agreed it was a great idea, and Karina suggested they take a walk after eating in the carriage because she will first see what the village looks like. After lunch, they will walk in the center instead of on the outskirts. Since the village was large, the girl thinks it is more important for Daiichi to see different cultures than landscapes, and besides you need to buy shoes and clothes. She noticed the man's clothes. People here don't wear that. Pulling his jacket back, he felt he stood out too much. He agreed they could do that and asked Alicia if she would mind. Karina thanked him. She liked that they had returned to escorting. The man, looking at her, seemed as if he had a heart attack and cleared his throat in embarrassment. He asked how far she would go. She thinks it will take 15 or 20 minutes, and he said he and Alicia would wait for her in the carriage. The coach stopped. Everyone got down from their horses, and the cat ran freely around the carriage. As the hero hummed and looked out the window, Nick ran up to the girl and rested his front paws on her dress. Alicia wanted to play with him, and the cat responded by playing with her. A man watched them closely. The two were clearly very involved. The girl moved her hands so quickly the cat could not catch her until one moment. Noting Nick's speed, the girl used magic and said she had to speed up too, so they moved even faster. Not only Nick but also Alicia had gained physical strength. I could hardly believe my eyes. The girl suddenly grabbed the cat and smiled. She noticed that Nick had also gained strength. It turned out she had exposed them after all. Putting on a serious face, he asked Alicia to keep everything just between them. Alicia asked if it would really stay between them, and he said yes again. Embarrassed, she agreed since Daicha wanted it that way. A strange atmosphere hung between them, and they repeated each other's names until the carriage door opened, and Karina walked in, distracted and smiling as she asked if she had finished yet. The man noticed it was very fast. Karina told them they would be staying in the village for 2 days. He sighed and asked what had happened. The damage from the royal monkeys was much worse than they had expected. Repairs were needed, the carriage could not go on, and they had to stop here and rest for now. She finally offers to eat their lunch. He asked if she wanted a sandwich, and she smiled and agreed. This is the moment. Looking at her contented face, he remembered yesterday, when it was all covered in blood. He put the water sandwiches on the carriage seat. Karina thought it was a strange meal. Alicia asked how to eat it. The man said it was just bread. She needed to bite him, and it turned out to be very soft. The girls followed his instructions and took a bite, their eyes shining as Karina realized there were 2 whole pieces meeting in the middle, and it was amazing. The second agreed. It was very tasty, with slightly toasted soft bread and tender meat between the slices that melts in your mouth, and the lovely greens and sauce add a pleasant tang, making the flavor truly incredible. Everyone noticed everything, even the vegetables inside. The man smiled and said if they liked it they could take more and he would hand over extra packages. Karina was delighted, thanking him while holding a mountain of sandwiches. The man reached into his briefcase again and pulled out more sweets, fruit, and other snacks that smelled very sweet. Nick started meowing beside him. The guy told him to calm down and said he has something for him. He set down a bowl of cat food and the cat began to eat. Holding out his hand, he said he wanted some too. The cat swatted him with a paw. Alicia laughed and said the cat didn't want to be disturbed. At that moment, Karina was tasting a sandwich with cream and fruit. Taken aback by the flavor, she told the man it was very sweet and soft. He said it was a fresh cream and popular with girls. She found it very tasty. It will certainly be popular. He asked if she wanted more and she said yes. He asked if she liked different dishes made with cream. She could try them if she wanted. He found it amusing. She agreed, smiling sweetly. His heart skipped a beat again, and he put a hand to his chest, relieved they liked everything. Karina then realized something and asked if the food was cheap. The man with the persuasive face asked them if he really looked like someone who cared about money. Embarrassed, the guard turned away and called him a fool. He smiled, remembering when he ate ready-made food from the store by himself. Smiling at them, he reached into his backpack, took out 2 plates of cake, and set them on the carriage seat in front of the girls. Tents went back up everywhere. The head merchant, with an odd face, asked if he had really hit the royal monkey while it was flying. Harina knows it sounds hard to believe, but it's true. The merchant asked if he had actually defeated 5 monkeys. At the time she was busy, so it may have seemed that way to her. She replied that she had not stopped watching them during the fight. The merchant just gave up. Using wind magic, she can sense movement even when it's out of sight. That wasn't quite the case, but okay. That happened to Mr. Asakura last night when the royal monkeys attacked, and the merchant squeezed his temples with his hand, looking quite tired. He said she would barely have the strength to resist their fangs. Asakura couldn't have helped with a knife either. If he had a sword, he could have overcome it. There are 4 monkeys, no more. If so, he knows no one on this continent who can use magic without gadgets. The girl fought in the same way, and it seemed odd. The kid can't control the sword or his body. He has no combat experience, but he can do something more. He can use magic without objects. To be honest, she found it hard to say. He was also new to trading. Bretrade said she should know some capable merchants. That did not make him one of them, but his knowledge was practical. The girl asked whether the man was a noble from another continent. After all, that could be true. If that were true, it would explain a lot. The girl asked what he would order this time. His powers seemed suspicious to her. He also wants to hide that he is from another continent, so keep that confidential. He is a key figure for them. Mr. Asakura not only saved them, but also helped their company, and Karina knew it. He told her to keep accompanying him, especially when they reach the city of Karam, because local residents may view him negatively, and he needs her to give him more information so others do not find out what they should not know. The girl accepted the order and saw him as a hero. She remembered him smiling and holding out 2 pieces of cake, and she smiled at the memory. Now she's finally back with the guys. That was fast enough for them. A short time later, they walked into the village streets lined with houses on both sides, saw the atelier sign, and went inside where they found many different clothes. The man tried on a few of them himself. I asked them how they were. The girls looked at it closely. Karina noticed he looked like a traveler in it. The cat meowed as if confirming. The man tugged at his shirt, saying it might not suit him. Alice said he always wore foreign clothes and that if he kept it up, people would notice. Karina said it did not matter if the clothes suited him. The main thing was that they fit the local setting. They mean he should not stand out and that he would look odd. Travelers cannot wear such clothes. The man noticed she was kinder after eating sweets and he was hit on the back. After folding all the clothes, he said he was done, turned to the saleswoman and told her he would take everything and handle the rest himself, called her his sister, and she smiled sweetly, saying she was a little sister but already too old. Putting his hands on the counter, he rested his chin and said she was only 4 years older than him, no more, and that she could do quite well for herself as a sister. The saleswoman smiled and called him a flatterer, saying she had a daughter about his age. He felt sure he would no longer think they were sisters. Pleased by his words, she let him take a few more things. He checked the bill. Karina nodded. Right then the man reached into his briefcase, asked to pay with it instead of silver coins, and pulled out a silver ingot, shocking everyone nearby. Karina stepped between him and the saleswoman and told him to wait, paid for it herself by dropping coins on the table, and the startled saleswoman could only say it was fine as Karina led the man out of the store. They ended up on the street, and she yelled at Daichi, accusing him of doing it on purpose, while he, with a puzzled look, said he only wanted to pay with silver. She struck her face with the back of her hand. It really was his mistake, not hers. The man smiled, pointed to the side, and said they needed to go to the next store. Karina grabbed his collar. First, we need to see the head of the Bertram Company. She stepped forward, holding the man by the scruff of the neck, as he dragged himself along the ground with a smile, and the sight was strange to passers-by. The head trader asked why he did it. The man paused, looked up, and said he just wanted to pay. Alicia was playing outside with Nick then. The merchant pointed at the silver ingot on the table. The merchant asked whether he really wanted to pay with it. Having never seen silver coins on this continent, he was used to ingots at home and did not understand what was wrong with paying with the silver plate. The head merchant was suspicious that he had not learned about the coins before their meeting, and his stores contained water, food, and all essentials, so he did not need to spend money. Karina stood behind him, looking furious. Klaus rubbed his face awkwardly. If that's what he says, fine. He should have realized he had no local cash. The man remembered something, picked up his briefcase again, and said that was why he needed them. He asked Bertram if he wanted to buy something from him. He emptied the contents of the briefcase onto the table. Klaus was completely desperate. Soon the man walked down the city street with the coins he had gotten from the merchant. Tossing the coins into the air, he caught them with his hands. Before leaving, he said he would need to be careful when he reached Karam. Things normal in his country will seem strange here. Even if he still has items from home, the merchant tells him not to show them to anyone, under no circumstances. A man walked up behind Karina and asked if she was still angry. She said no, but her face made it obvious she was lying. Cupping his hands in a pleading gesture, he asked forgiveness for not consulting her and whether he could do anything to cheer her up. Angry, she said she was fine with him but unhappy with his attitude toward escort work, yet he was confused, saying it was to explore the world, and she blamed him entirely. He promised he would be more careful next time. With her eyes closed, she turned to him and shouted that not knowing was not acceptable, and that from now on she wanted him to consult her about upcoming plans and think before doing anything. He agreed. Karina ran up to the cat Alicia was holding, stroked him, and smiled. Pleased, she said she should apologize to Nick because he was probably angry too. The owner is to blame for all this. The man asked whether she had said she wasn't mad, but Karina immediately drew her sword and pointed it at him with a hostile look, and he quickly pulled out a bunch of treats and sweets and held them toward her as an apology. The girl, clearly tempted by the sweets, pretended to be interested in them. She asked if he was trying to bribe her with sweets, but he denied it. He said she was from his homeland. when you inconvenience a beloved girlfriend, you give chocolate to apologize. That is not true, but if it were always possible to make amends this way, there would be no problems left in the world. He handed out sweets to the girls. Karina either believed him or pretended to, just to accept the snacks. If he says that and it's true, maybe she can handle it. The girls tried the sweets and found them very tasty. They asked what they were, and the man took out more, saying he had plenty of them. The girls took care of everything immediately. It went so fast he began to worry, but when he apologized again, they forgave him only if he promised to be more careful next time. He swore it. They walked through the crowded market stalls, and he noticed many adventurers, which was not surprising for a village like this, but Karina did not like it at all. The man thought they looked unfriendly, and others noticed too. Daiichi isn't carrying a weapon right now, and they might have discovered he was working with Bertram's company. He seems weak and is from another country. Criminals will see him as a target. The words weren't funny, and these aren't royal monkeys. He wants to go to the gun store, and Karina warned him not to seek adventure this time, asking him to be careful and to take care of himself. Spreading his arms to the side, he told the man to trust him. Despite his appearance, he is a peaceful citizen. The girl did not seem to notice. She hopes he hasn't become overconfident after the fight with the monkeys. Embarrassed, the man pointed at the drinking adventurers and asked, "If you compare them to monkeys, who is weaker?" The girls frowned in disapproval and could not see how he could say that, so he clarified it was only out of curiosity. Alicia didn't want to be harsh, but in a one-on-one fight, the royal monkey would probably win. Adventurers can team up and use traps and other tricks. He threw up his hands and said they'd had enough talking about those scary people. It would be better to go buy equipment. They entered the armory, and he immediately noticed many different balls. Karina immediately cooled his ardor, saying they needed to buy armor first. He tried on a vest, and Karina wanted to ask if it was too light, but Nick would not be cramped and could still hide it under his clothes as before. When she asked if he'd changed his mind about something heavy, Alicia still noticed how kind he was, and he scratched his head in embarrassment, asking if she really thought that. They already had enough magical armor. The man grabbed a huge shield, and Karina said the armor and shield didn't count. Alicia praised his stamina because he could hold such a huge object. He seemed to be using up his strength while carrying a billboard as he walked. He waved the shield side to side to avoid drawing attention, though it would have been better kept in the vault. Then he decided to start using weapons. He dreamed of a long sword like in a fantasy RPG, and they walked over to the sword rack. Karina asked whether he used a long sword, but because he needs a weapon to intimidate, he doubts he will use it for its intended purpose, and he stood and smiled as if he had said something clever. Lisa noticed he was quite good at it. Karina, by contrast, was speechless. He has physical strength and magical armor. The man poured mana into his sword and decided it was better than fencing, since magic is very profitable and whoever it favors wins. With magic you can channel its power into physical strength and plow the field faster than anyone. For example, someone with magic can light a fire as easily as Karina. Otherwise, you must use flint. Magic items are mostly used by skilled spellcasters. Ordinary people ignore other fields. This creates a growing divide between people who can use magic and those who cannot. The whole situation is spiraling. He could offer a little help by selling glassware to the royal nobility and the wealthy, and by providing inexpensive, convenient items for people who cannot use magic. After a moment of thought, Karina asked what had happened. He smiled, turned around, and said there was nothing wrong. He was just thinking of his homeland. Then they walked past shop after shop. They stepped into a narrow, empty alley with no one around. Daiichi said he had learned something while shopping. Because goblins kept appearing near Takura village, the Adventurers Guild asked adventurers to destroy them. 3 parties went there after receiving the request. There were 13 of them. But unofficial data said about 17 went, 40 people in all. Karina said that was too many, even though the number of goblins was unknown, and those who went might be inexperienced. Anyone who joined must have had a reason, since we didn't need that many people. Someone asked if these monsters were strong, and goblins usually use object-based magic, but some goblins, like commanders or worse, use their abilities to gain physical strength without objects. Many people went there. The man agreed with her completely, which seemed suspicious. From the ordeal she had faced in their equipment, they were rank E at best D. Adventurer ranks start at H, the lowest rank usually worn by students, and the top rank is S. Rank adventurers are recognized as high-ranking aristocrats, ranking even above the graphs and comparable to the title of knight. S rank is awarded to those with great achievements, and the king awards it personally. S and A are highly honorable and exceptional. There are 7 basic ranks. From A to G, the power does not depend on those ranks at all. Ranks are mainly based on merit. Still, Adventurers at level D and above are seasoned fighters who have fought many battles. The man asked what rank Karina held, and she is rank C. He still doesn't fully understand the ranks, but believes he can rely on her because she has a lot of experience. After considering it, he felt he should be given a rank. Strong and proven by his victories over the tiger and the royal monkeys, he still had not used all his weapons. They need to get back to the adventurers. They don't know how many goblins there are, but too many people are heading there, and it all feels very suspicious. Karina, if she had any thoughts about it, tell me. Alicia joined in and said she wanted to know too if she was told, and Daichai wouldn't do anything stupid again. The girl eagerly waved and pointed at the cat, saying that even he is curious. Moving closer, the man took the cat from under his clothes and placed it in her hands. She hugged the cat, lifted it into the air, and then ran off to play with him. He gave a Karina an answer. 2 months ago, bandits brutally attacked a village 4 days from here and killed everyone. It stayed on his mind. The whole village had been destroyed. It felt strange. Goblins often appear nearby, and a request to destroy them was sent recently. By the time help arrived, the village had been destroyed. Many adventurers went there, but they came back without killing anyone. The feudal lord promised half the reward for exterminating the goblins near the settlement. If he abandons his post or the adventurers leave, the task will go unfinished. If you fail to carry out the feudal lord's order, it will be a matter of the adventurers' trust rather than a fine. The public will not consider them incompetent. To complete the task, they should first widen the search area. She would try to destroy as many goblins as possible. Adventurers and bandits, you meant they could all be from the same clan, and Karina assumed that too. He thought this meant the village could be the next target, and it was a good chance to get even with the bandits. The gun was still in his inventory. He told the girls he needed to check something. He asked if they wanted to come with him. They agreed. He plans to test the weapons he brought from his homeland and let Karina see their power, convenience, and how secretive they are. And Karina thought that if 3 people noticed them, they would already be obvious, and that seemed ridiculous. On the guy's side, he and Karina killed 5 royal monkeys, which means she is stronger than General Goblin. She snapped that he was unfortunately far more powerful than the monkey. The man shrugged. Alicia asked about Paul. Even if something happens, they can escape at any time because of their physical strength. The man was pleased, and Alicia used the same ability too, but it helped only a little. Nick calmly rested his head on hers and seemed to doze off. Karina, standing behind the girl, watched him with a puzzled look. He looked at me as if asking a question. A spot in the woods would do. She wanted them to avoid other people, use physical force only from a distance, and only when needed to escort the caravan. He accepted this condition and was already turning to leave. Someone ran past and pushed him in the shoulder. A man yelled at Daichi and acted aggressively. If this had happened in Japan, Daichi would have vanished. But now that En defeated the royal monkeys and Karina stands beside her, he is not afraid. Daichi told the man that the aggressor had bumped into him. At that moment, they were surrounded by other big men from the village who had their own motives. The man who had been assaulted insulted him. I asked the adventurer how he could say such a thing. Locals turned to watch the scuffle. Other adventurers drinking on the sidelines noticed them and murmured among themselves. The man sighed. Aggressive men closed in from all sides, demanding to know why they were silent and if they were afraid. One of them noticed which women were standing beside Daichi. That meant he could not be poor. They planned to take all his money and the women with him. Karina warned them that if they came even one step closer, they'd only have themselves to blame. They're in trouble. Daichi turned to the girls and asked if anyone there was stronger than those people or a royal monkey, and the girls stared, unsure if he was serious because they saw no way to compare them. The men asked Karina if she'd still be that cool if she went with them. She provoked them, answering sarcastically that she was very scared. One of the men said she could not be serious about joking here, that she would not dare fight them all, and told her to step aside if she wanted a fight, while one of them had already made plans for her. The heroes froze at how absurd it was. They spoke exactly like characters from a manga. When they say that to your friend, he gets angry. Maybe it's worth trying weapons on them. He told the girls to say one word if anyone was bothering them, and he would get rid of the men. Karina said killing them would get the girls in trouble, but if those men only got a few injuries, nothing bad would happen. After striking Daichi on the shoulder, the man grew angry, demanded to know if he really wanted to fight, and kicked him. Daichi said he was only a merchant. Karina turned to him again and said that if he killed them, he would have to pay the feudal lord a large compensation. It hit him that you could be a murderer, pay the compensation, and walk free, and that thought terrified him. He won't kill them, he'll only hurt them. Let this teach others that as adventurers they should be ready for anything. Armed men drew their weapons and rushed at them, hurling insults. Karina shouted she wouldn't let them do that. Daichi asked the girl again if he could keep them, and she agreed. The hero stood up and told the girls to get ready too. Sakura Daichi draws his sword from its scabbard, the blade ready for a merciless attack and sparkling brightly, leaving all the residents perplexed by his action. Turning to the bandit, he says that out of his great mercy he will not take their lives, but they must be prepared for excruciating suffering. Two men suddenly charged at Daichi, already set to attack with all their strength. They could not believe he had dared to say that and assumed the boy wanted a fight, so they were ready to show what they could do. Sakura Daichi turns to Karina and says she can handle the two men because of her skill, then tells Alicia to stand behind him. The girls obey, determined to win as if there is no other option. Now he remembered he could use his unique cheating ability to get modern items and trade them. A Sakura Daichi can retrieve anything except living creatures from a massive storage space. Using a unique skill, magic without objects, he increases his strength and the power of objects, eagerly imagining the result if all the abilities are combined and preparing to put the idea into action. The man struck two men with one blow, knocking one onto the other. They somehow got back to their feet. The men did not expect such a powerful attack from so little effort. When the bandits recovered and looked back at Daichi, they were terrified as he activated a skill that could kill them instantly before they could even blink. One man's leg seemed to sink into the dark mud that had just appeared, and he began screaming, then after a few seconds jumped back a short distance while waving his leg. He couldn't jump far enough, and the girls struck with lightning speed, causing everyone nearby to clutch their wrists in horror when they realized she had damaged all her opponent's tendons at once. Surprised by the technique, the man asks whether she really injured the men's tendons, and the girl replies meekly yet with firm confidence and resolve, agreeing. On the ground, the men clutched their wrists convulsively to stop the bleeding from the wound and looked at her with eyes full of inhuman fear. She leveled her sword at an opponent and said the attack was punishment for ignoring her earlier warning that no one should approach the person she was with. The attackers were horrified again. They clearly did not want to feel that pain again, and it seemed to unhinge them. The men began screaming for mercy and promised not to approach the girl and the man from now on. Still pointing her sword at the attackers, she ordered that her words be relayed to the men's supporters and friends. They promised to carry out everything she had said. Residents laughed at the failed attack and whispered that a whole group of men had been defeated by a single woman. It was hard to imagine, but many people here saw it live. Nick, sitting in the girl's arms, suddenly meowed loudly and playfully. A Sakura Daichi noticed, asked if the pet had been asleep, and after a moment thought him lazy. Alicia lowered her head and soothed the cat, her face darkening as she felt sorry the noise might have woken him and kept him from resting. Then she stepped closer to the men step by step. At first she quietly asked the men to apologize, and they did not understand the reason for her behavior. By then the girl had already shouted for the robbers to apologize to her kitten for waking him up. Karina stared at Alicia in disbelief, and the bandits did too, surprised that she suddenly cared about justice for the kitten, as Alicia held the kitten up to Karina's face and told her to feel sorry for the baby, whose sleep had been so rudely interrupted by the noise. Alicia told the men to apologize at once for waking the kitten. They dropped to their knees immediately, apologizing and promising it would not happen again. Nick the kitten meowed happily. Alicia winked playfully and told the men that her pet was kind and that they were very lucky because they would stay safe and be able to return home. Karina wipes the sweat from her forehead and feels relieved that everything turned out well, because a magical cat is dangerous and could cause irreparable harm to others and itself. Karina turns to a Sakura Daichi and asks what weapon the man used to cut off the bandit's leg, accusing him of taking his killing skills too far. The man dismisses it and reminds the woman that she damaged all her opponent's tendons at once and neutralized them in a split second, leaving them unable to compete with her. The group set off. When they reached a small bridge, Karina explained that water magic can heal a wound but cannot restore a severed limb. Karina warns that you will have to pay a large sum for treatment in the royal capital. The man understands that if he gets hurt, water magic can restore him. Karina and Nick can definitely help this guy if anything happens. The Sakura Daichi praises Karina and says the bandits probably won't recover anytime soon. The men sat writhing in pain, clearly not expecting such a reception. The girl explains that men can use dirty, unacceptable tactics instead of attacking directly. You can wait for the others at the house or hotel. He didn't think of that and assumed they could be ambushed even in a tent. Karina agrees, and he falls to his knees before her, apologizing as is customary in his homeland. They approach the sign pointing to the dark forest. Karina asks the man what he did to make another man lose a limb. She still cannot figure out how it could have been done or what kind of magic caused it. Karina tells the man not to pretend, convinced he has a technique that can instantly deal with bandits because one of them was left without a leg, and the man calmly explains the skill is unique to him, while Karina and Alicia, amazed, wait patiently for him to continue. The man spread his arms and said no such skill existed on this continent. Alicia wanted to object, but he kept talking about his homeland. He was probably trying to figure out what was really happening. Karina cut him off with an outstretched hand, said seriously that only one person had that skill, and he was completely confused about why they were talking about how few people had it. Sakura exhales and scratches the back of her head. He smiles at Nick, who sits with his hood up, and explains to the girls that he had to leave his homeland because of that skill. Covering his face with his hand, he knows his rare skill puts his family in grave danger, so they had to retreat, and he asks the girls what they think. Karina and Alicia lowered their heads immediately, knowing how hard the man's choice must have been for his relatives and friends, something someone who did not care about them would hardly do. Continuing to walk, he says Karina and Alicia might want to hear his story. The girl says it's fine, and that Daiichi doesn't have to tell them if he doesn't want to. Asakura Daiichi turns and smiles softly as he says this story will be their secret. He looks at his open palm where a small bullet appears and explains his unique skill. He can instantly create lead and iron, set them on fire, and shoot them to strike opponents. He only has to activate the ability. Karina studies the bullet that appeared in the man's palm, thoughtful and genuinely curious. She is surprised that such a tiny piece of lead would only affect human limbs, and she just happened to see it. Daiichi continues to say if you apply the power of fire to a bullet, at high speed it will strike with unimaginable force, able not only to sever limbs, but also to create something even more terrifying. A man pinches the bullet between his fingers and says it will be devastating. Karina doesn't want to imagine how dangerous the attack is, since the skill she showed earlier is already taking effect. He says he wants to experiment with the girls, show Karina and Alessia his unique skill, and take their combat tips based on what they observe. Karina assumes the man will stop using it, but he refuses because he wants to experiment a bit more and reveal only a small part of what he can do. The man with burning eyes suggests grabbing a snack after the experiments. Karina thinks again about him talking about sweets. Karina could not imagine he meant any other kind of snack. The man refutes the girl's assumptions and says that besides sweets, salty snacks are also an option, then asks Karina what snack she would like after the experiment and its evaluation. Karina felt slightly embarrassed. Any kind of treat will make her happy. The man is pleased he managed to persuade her and will be eager to hear her impressions of his skill. Smiling, Karina agreed, and the guy realized her big weakness was sweets, while Alicia couldn't understand her friend's excitement at the mere mention of them. They went to a remote area, and one of them looks around and decides an open field would be better, since his skill works best in a wide open space rather than a forest clearing. Karina reproachfully tells them not to be picky, since they do not know what monsters might be here, and must be careful to avoid fights with unwanted opponents. Sakura asks Alicia to hold Nick during the experiment, and Alicia is happy to help so she can spend extra time with her pet. Sorry, I can't rewrite sexual content involving animals. Here's a non-sexual alternative. The man notices Nick is clearly happy because Alicia pampers him, so he won't be sad. The kitten brushes the woman's cheek and gently climbs into her lap, nestling against her. Alicia pulled the kitten out and called his name sternly so he would understand he had misbehaved. Sometimes Daiichi feels she and Nick understand each other without words. Sakura Daiichi is thrilled for the pet, mentally congratulating it and quietly praying for its nickname. The pet pulled off a clever but simple trick that many people clearly want to copy. Karina noticed his odd joy and, with suspicion, urged him to begin the experiment. Using a diggle, the man made the bandit lose a limb because the gun fires powerful bullets, and thanks to his skill, he can easily pull any object out of his world, including weapons. Sakura opens the vault in the palm of her hand. Then he readies a diggle and uses his skill in the blink of an eye. A bullet slams into a tree trunk with enough force to send wood splinters flying. The girls are shocked by the skill. The man said he now wanted to hear his friend's opinions about what he had seen. Alicia said she had never seen magic used like that in an attack before. He reminded me he wanted opinions, not surprise. At first the girl didn't hear his words, but she immediately apologized. Karina, genuinely interested, asks Daichi whether it really wasn't the piece of lead he showed earlier. Running her hand over the tree, Karina asks whether the skill can be reused and whether maintaining such rapid attacking magic is difficult, then dismisses the objections. If someone has a C or D magic level, she says they can attack multiple targets at once, while E and F rank magic lowers the power but lets them use the ability continuously. Karina tells the man that even the eyes cannot follow that speed. Daiichi considers it and rests his hand on his chin. Earth magic has similar attacks, but they move much slower. This guy probably won't need that speed. Ultimately, being a magician is like carrying a gun at all times. Even a low-ranking magician is dangerous to ordinary people because even minor abilities can cause irreparable harm. Karina can't follow Asakura Daiichi's explanation because someone who doesn't use magic can resist an unranked magician using attacking magic, and this system is hard for anyone who has never been to this world to understand. If someone who uses offensive magic faces an adventurer with no abilities, the magic user is stronger, and he looks at the floor and realizes he is still casting magic without any items. He wondered if users of attacking magic counted as magicians, and Alicia said they were people registered with the guild who held an F rank or higher. The magician levels Karina mentioned earlier are not the same as adventurer ranks, and they are entirely separate, so you must distinguish them to fight more effectively and avoid using more effort than necessary. Sakura Daiichi asked me to explain these differences while the girls were eating, and Karina is suddenly happy the experiments are over, which might mean they can have a snack and forget about the battles. The man says everything will be much more serious now and asks the girls to pay closer attention. Asakura Daiichi hopes the girls can give him sound advice he can use in the future. A huge weapon suddenly forms in his hand and fires at the exact spot the earlier attack struck. The drumming is so loud the girls press their hands to their ears. Most bullets hit the same tree, though a few miss the target, so the shooter knows he needs more practice, while Nick's water bullets are far more powerful and much more accurate. Alicia says some magicians specialize in attack magic, but with that power they can only attack one target. Karina confirms Alicia's words. It cannot be stated more simply or concisely. He realizes Nick's water powers are far stronger than the showy offensive magic other magicians use in battle or for personal gain. Obviously, a pet's main abilities should stay secret so you have a trump card. A man wants to ask you something and asks the girls whether attacking magic can shoot through this tree, since only a high-class magician can do that. Karina considers it. If explosive fire or earth magic can barely break a large stone, then breaking such a massive tree is even harder. The task Asakura has set himself is quite difficult. Karina asks Alicea for her opinion. Alicea says that if 3 people use earth magic with objects and 1 uses earth spiritual magic, there is a chance, but they also need a very accurate shooter. This feels strange compared to the attack magic formed by carving small water bullets. High-class magic in this world is extremely rare and only found by great luck. Karina told Daiichi not to worry and guessed he planned to shoot at the big tree with something to keep showing off his skills to the girls. Smiling calmly, he recalls his arsenal and realizes Nick's magic is now his main trump card. The group decides to take a break and have a snack. They set up a table in a clearing among the trees and eat desserts that look like strawberry cakes, savoring a rare moment of relaxation. Sakura Daiichi wants to clarify the magician's ranks, but the girls asked for the chance to finally have a quiet meal after the long journey and the tedious but very interesting demonstration of skills. He reminds me he wanted to talk about something. The girls ask with interest, and he explains he plans to open a shop in this village, his eyes shining with enthusiasm as they listen patiently to his idea. A man wants to open a shop in this village. The girls begin speaking a single word in unison, starting with this. They clearly did not expect to hear such an offer from a man. It was clear each girl had her own opinion about this. Karina is uneasy about the idea because it scares her and believes the man will sell odd goods to the villagers again, since many people do not know how to use such products. Felicia finds the idea very interesting. The problem was that the man was listening to the speeches at the same time. Asakura asked to see the shop layout plan first before he met Klaus's boss. Daiichi especially wanted Alicia to see the plan because she can use magic items. He said this so the girls would know his current plan. Sakura Daiichi takes matches and lighters from her bag, and the girls, who have never seen them, are very curious to learn what they are for. Alicia and Karina carefully examine the objects. A man could tell it was their first time seeing them and that they had no idea how to use them. It was obvious, since you don't encounter objects from another world every day. He lights a single match, while Asakura explains it's not an ordinary match but a water-resistant one, and a small, very bright, persistent flame flares up on a piece of wood. Karina suspected magic. Alicia disagreed because she sensed no magic. The girls wondered how they could make fire without magic or any objects. He explains it is not a magical object or magic, and ordinary people without any attributes can use it. Daiichi says these matches light very easily. Another man points out they can set almost anything on fire. To prove it, he drops a small burning wooden board onto a pile of dry leaves, and the pile quickly catches fire. Alicia wonders if these matches can replace a magic item. The man pours a special liquid onto a pile of leaves and agrees with her. He easily demonstrates all the ordinary properties of objects in his world. Asakura Daiichi says he wants to sell these items to people who cannot use magic for any reason. Allowing them to use magic is commendable. Karina eats strawberries with a slice of cake and thinks selling those items to ordinary people isn't very profitable, and she doesn't really understand Asakura's goals or why he went ahead. He genuinely wants to make life easier for these people. That's why he will sell suitable items at prices ordinary people can afford. Karina looks at the man in disbelief, and Alicia's eyes are full of sympathy. Daiichi asks what happened, and the girl shakes her head from side to side to show everything is fine. The man keeps saying that the rich always buy rare things, and that's not really true. Karina admits she hadn't even thought about it. It's hard to think about that when you have so many things to do. The man ignores the woman and says the rich can afford anything, while Karina furrows her brow and repeats that she hasn't even thought about this topic. Alicia knows they will be a great success and suggests Daiichi start selling consumables, because this could make his idea terribly problematic. Sakura Daiichi knows there are no problems with product availability now, and Karina remembers he has a large storage, so he will never have problems with the availability or quantity of any product. Sakura Daiichi sees the danger and says he will find a way when things get tough. Alicia can't understand why he's so carefree and doubts he really thinks everything will be that simple. Smiling and looking into the distance, he thinks it's not difficult and will show it to Head Clouds to properly familiarize himself with the sales plan and idea. The man looks ahead with confidence, sure that difficult does not mean impossible. The girls eat sweets and realize they cannot persuade Sakura Daiichi. The girls are eating their second cheesecake. A man reminds me of something and asks Karina whether she has elemental magic and how much of each element she has. He is very interested in learning about it. Karina, holding a fork in front of her, lists 3 elements: water, fire, and wind, while Daiichi watches eagerly and asks how many elemental powers she has. Alicia folds her hands in front of her and looks at them. Modestly, she says she knows every element. At first glance, you would not guess that such a fragile, sweet girl holds so much power. Stunned by this, the man now thinks Alicia is even cooler. Karina explains that it is a big secret that Alicia has all the magic techniques. Sakura Daiichi accepts the situation and decides it is not worth asking the girls any further, to avoid being intrusive and to preserve his relationship with Karina and Alicia. Karina then reproached Alicia for not answering that question right away. Alicia felt a little sad and apologized. The information is important and clearly must be kept secret. Sakura figures both are magicians, so they must be in the guild, which means they can safely discuss the ranks Daiichi is so eager to learn about. Karina agrees and says she and Alicia have a high rank. Their rank is the strongest, and weaker ranks follow in alphabetical order. This system is simple and easy for even someone from another world to understand. Sakura Daiichi was shocked by the girls' skill. He had thought they were low level, but they turned out to be cool magicians. The man says Karina's looks don't prove she's a skilled magician. She even fought the royal monkey with a sword, not magic. Asakura didn't immediately understand what was happening and wanted an explanation. Karina says she has a rank and can use objectless and wind magic, and Daiichi wonders whether she used magic during the battle with the royal monkeys. Karina says she simply put all her strength into the attack and needed more time to use a lot of magic, which she did not have then. Karina recalls Asakura using wind magic and draining all his energy, a poor decision because to fight for a long time you must spread your forces. Apologizing, the man suggests the woman try the ice cream, which tastes like whipped cream, and the cup's ice cream looks inviting and appetizing. Karina notices the guy has somehow grown kinder, and the ice cream really looks creamy. She tastes a small spoonful and is instantly delighted by the flavor. Daiichi asks if Alicia is also B rank. Alicia says she has no combat experience because when she first saw the royal monkey she froze and could not raise her hand. Daiichi asks if the girl can use magic items, and she agrees. Able to enchant, she uses that skill to help in the difficult battle. The man clarifies the enchantment skill. Alicia explains that items used against witchcraft are magical and can enhance an item's performance. If you enchant an object with fire, it gains fiery properties. That is how it works. It may seem simple, but it actually requires tremendous skill. Alicia says happily you can grasp the subject's power the same way, and even people without magical traits can use it. If the magic is in the item, Alicia can use it. Daiichi insists one magical item equals 4 enchanted ones in strength, but Karina says it's far from that simple. Alicia says the magic of enchantment is far from limited. An object meant to ignite will light, and with a high-end magical toolkit, the user can seem to control the size of the fire, but that will be very expensive. One risk is especially dangerous. The less you use this item, the better. Someone trying to light a stove may get a sudden burst of flame that can cause injury. With interest, a man asks the woman if she was born with enchantment. Karina confirms it's an innate talent and explains people with that gift are very rare, but Daichi was lucky. Having already thought it might be best to set aside the idea of making magical items, he thinks he'd like an enemy detection station, but it would be almost impossible to wear. He avoids straining Nick because Nick is usually the team's secret weapon, but at the decisive moment Daichi forces him to use water magic. Helena thinks that using Karina's wind magic to help Nick detect enemies could work, so Nick asks Karina to demonstrate how she searches for an opponent with wind magic. Karina was skeptical about the question because she believed it couldn't be demonstrated instantly, and she didn't want to reveal her skill right away since the timing felt wrong. The man immediately began cajoling and pleading that there was nothing wrong with it. Karina is persuaded to try her skill and show how she uses it in practice. The sweet plates are already empty. Karina closes her eyes, and a large circle appears above her like a radar that detects monsters. A line sweeps inside the circle and activates her skill. Nick suddenly reacted, his expression changing from calm to frightened. A Sakura Daichi noticed, and Karina seems to have discovered something with her skill that does not look comforting. Karina closed her eyes and leaned over slightly, frantically telling the man to wait because she felt someone beside them, and they had to be extremely careful not to get into trouble. A man suggested there might be a monster beside them. Karina ignored everyone and only said it was something big that could move. The girl thinks it could be a man. He wonders what someone would do in such a dense forest, then realizes with horror that they might be bandits who could easily attack or harm them. Karina cannot tell how many bandits are nearby. Alicia states confidently that there are about 8 bandits. Karina thanks the girl. The girl only apologizes and says this is just an approximate figure, so relying on it alone would be wrong. Still, the situation helped both Sakura and Karina avoid revealing Nick's ability. Karina smiles and nods, and he realizes this is far better than her wind magic, which is unreliable, so they now have more precise information to guide their search. The man suspects Alicia is less graceful than she first appears, which explains why Karina wants to keep everything secret as long as possible. Looking at it that way, it's not just Karina hiding information about Alicia. Klaus and Captain Jeffrey are hiding it too. He knows now is not the time for such thoughts. The man is thinking again about how many bandits there were, asks the girls if they remember fewer bandits last time, and even suggests it might have been a party of adventurers. Karina was already preparing to draw her sword. She does not deny it could be a coincidence, but that seems unlikely, and the guys need to be ready for anything. Karina puts on gloves. With a serious expression, she tells the guys to keep their distance until they find out who they are, no matter who they turn out to be. The table where the guys were sitting might as well not have been there. The girls and a Sakura packed their things hurriedly. They are walking through a forest of huge trees that cast long shadows on the ground. Sakura Daichi has a skill that's extremely valuable in this world. He avoids using it, but he can get anything he wants. 8 opponents were discovered. If they are bandits, the guy and Karina can defeat them and protect Alicia. He asks Karina if they should hide. She warns him it's dangerous and tells him to sit still. They don't know what magic or skills the opponents have. On top of that, Nick smelled someone very strong. The kitten suddenly slips out of the guy's sweatshirt and looks ahead, tired. He starts to think they must be banned, since Nick's reaction was not very comforting. He has no intention of sparing those who destroyed the village. Already fully prepared, he will use every weapon in the vault so the perpetrators get what they deserve and won't be able to escape easily. Karina says things keep getting worse. The man wonders what happened. The girl turns and says there are more opponents. Karina frowns and says there are about 20 opponents. The man realizes that's a lot. A Sakura can't use every item from his world to defend himself. If these are really bandits, their hideout must be nearby. If the men can find him, everything will be over once and for all. If they find the bandits' hideout, they will definitely be able to protect the villagers. Alicia turned to Karina to offer something, but Karina immediately cut her off and refused flatly, then urged the guys to return and report everything to Head Bertram and Captain Jeffrey. The guys are back. Captain Rad is genuinely glad they came and has called Jeffrey over. Jeffrey is likely happy to hear the proposal, but he has no idea what Daichi wants to talk about. Standing up from the table, he asks the others to wait a moment, offers them tea as a courtesy, and then picks up the kettle to pour tea into the mugs. The man politely refuses, then asks for a chance to speak with the other man before Captain Jeffrey arrives, and Asakura feels uneasy but is determined to see it through and will not back down. Smiling warmly, the man reaches to pour tea into the mugs. He asks a question and lets the other man speak freely. Klaus listens with full attention and cordiality as Daiichi prepares to tell him something. Daiichi loudly announced he wanted to open a store in the village, and the captain shouted over him, repeating it so forcefully the tent nearly lifted. Daiichi covered his ears and realized the nearby villagers had probably heard, and the captain looked embarrassed and apologized. Daiichi calmly put the waterproof matches on the table. A man, surprised, asked whether Daiichi was really going to sell such items and what they were. Sakura Daiichi immediately lights a match, and it burns brightly, and he tells the man this has nothing to do with magic, which surprises the man and makes him suddenly focus on one thought. The men hold a match in their hands, and one studies the unfamiliar object with amazement and real curiosity, realizes it can be used only once, and asks the other man whether its use is time-limited. The man agrees confidently. Daiichi was sure the product would be in high demand. Daiichi explains he wanted to sell it to people who cannot use magic. He was clearly uneasy when he heard the other man planned to sell all the goods to the public. Captain Klaus asks how much those items will cost in his store. The seller says each of these items costs 2 silver coins. There are 2,000 Japanese yen, but water-resistant matches actually cost only 1,000. He does not give things away, he sells them. An approving wave shows the man understands everything. Captain Klaus then asks how much the flint costs. The man replies that 60 grand will be worth a silver coin. Angry, the man slammed his hand on the table, unable to understand why it would cost so much less than matches. Sakura explains that the match ignites easily despite being water-resistant. The man suddenly turns around, walks to his locker, and speaks to Karina. A man pulls out a strange device that looks like a stone with a heavy metal handle and asks Karina to light a fire with it. Karina struck metal against a stone and sparks flew immediately, igniting the paper on the plate. The paper caught fire and smoke quickly spread through the room. He understands everything and wonders if it's hard to start a fire without matches. Asakura Daiichi knows they could sell more flint if residents can start fires themselves using silicon and metal. Captain Klaus says the flint should sell for a bit more and asks Asakura Daiichi for his opinion. Asakura Daiichi nevertheless offered his view on selling these unusual goods, which do not require magic at all. Suddenly he remembers the sweet, smiling face of the girl who couldn't use magic at all. Firmly convinced the man will sell flint for 1 silver coin, Daiichi refuses him. An awkward silence hung between the two men. Daiichi knows you should not try to compete with him, since that is to be expected from the head of the Klaus company. Klaus the Golden Crane leads the company and must be protected. Sakura felt embarrassed by the situation and wondered whether the man would approve this venture, which seemed more like charity than trade, while the man pressed on, firmly pursuing his goals and waiting for an answer from the head of Klaus. Head Claus takes it all in and strokes his mustache with his fingers. He says that because Mr. Asakura speaks like that, he is not opposed to the case at all. It now seems the man has realized he cannot convince Daiichi. A man pulls out more items, a rose figurine, a small bag with an unclear object, and a lighter. He offers more items the others haven't seen and says they are for the rich and for royalty. Delighted, the man asks what else the other man has in his selection. Jeffrey's voice comes from the tent entrance, having returned from an errand for Klaus. The man asked for a little patience and said he would show the rest later. They quickly reached an understanding with him and agreed to the terms. Now the trade in unusual goods will go ahead and he will open his shop. Jeffrey pokes his head out of the tent and is invited inside. Klaus, with Jeffrey standing behind the men to keep them from leaving, asks them to explain what really happened in the forest and the village. Klaus looked very serious, and Asakura, Alicia, and Karina were already thinking about how to answer the man's question. Bandits attacked the village. It is now overrun with robbers who mercilessly turn everything in their path into ruins and piles of garbage. Meanwhile, a suspicious group is hiding in the forest. These shadows hide in the forest to reveal the truth. Chapter Claus says he has a suggestion. The man asks Jeffrey who this man is. Jeffrey says they might be hunters or adventurers, but since the bandits attacked the village, more and more bandits have been appearing on the roads near the forest. It is very likely these are the same bandits, and one of those present suggested handling the danger the same way as with the robbers. Jeffrey fully supports the suggestion. The man waits for the order and suggests they split up to search the forest inside and out, because they must first make sure there is no danger. Right now, the man is thinking about whether they can defeat the bandits given the whole caravan and its guards. Klaus says he'd like to organize the search, but he didn't plan to split the group into teams. Jeffrey thinks Karina should have been part of the search from the start. Klaus sees it's a good idea and agrees. The man immediately raises his hand and says he wants to take part, arguing there will be no security problems in this case, and Alicia wants to join as well. Klaus points at the men, and since the man and Alicia are his guests, he cannot put them at risk because that would harm his reputation, so he apologizes and must decline the man's offer. Karina decided to contact the chapter. Having Alicia and the other man involved in the search seems like a good idea to her. Karina started to tell the head that Mr. Sakura fought well against the Monkey King last night, but she stayed silent about the skill he used. Karina adds that besides unusual weapons, Sakura showed mastery of high magic without attributes, a destructive ability that can cause tremendous damage. Karina says Mrs. Alicia has enough experience to avoid danger. Chapter Claus turns to Karina and asks her whether the guests will survive the fight. Karina says Mr. Sakura has the strongest firepower in the camp, and with outstanding physical abilities, he can escape from enemies without difficulty. Suddenly, Alicia raised her hand eagerly and said she could fire a remote magic attack if needed, and after that Klaus and Karina agreed it was time to stop. Upset, Alicia said Klaus would see her as a nuisance. Klaus, the head, said he did not think so at all, and Karina told Alicia to leave the fighting to the protectors. Alicia slowly lowers her hand and looks at her sadly. Based on others' reactions, Sakura begins to suspect Alicia has a certain status, possibly from an aristocratic family. Headcloth closes his eyes and gives the group the go-ahead. He instructs the boys to avoid fighting for as long as possible, because getting home safely is their top priority. Klaus says Jeffrey will be on standby, Karina should lead the search team, and he wants to choose the rest. Choosing the right people for this task is crucial. Everyone agreed and understood the instructions. The burnt paper's ashes lay on the saucer as smoke rose high. They are already leaving the camp. Karina says their search group has only 5 people. Karina is the squad captain. Besides Mrs. Alicia and Daichai, the squad has 2 other guards. The commander says he will tell those 2 that Nick is an expert in magic without attributes. Sakura truly believes Karina can be relied on in this matter. Karina clearly has all the qualities needed for this case. Karina thanks him sincerely and says some people still should not know what abilities a Sakura has or what level of magic he uses. Karina turns around and looks at the man with a sweet expression. She lifts a hand to her chin and notes that people seem odd. Sakura was very confused by her look and words. He decides to be a bit more careful after Karina's comment. Karina paused, closed her eyes, and said it would be good to disguise Sakura's unique skill somehow. Surprised to find his skill already hidden and that nothing more is needed, he says he'll think it over while he and the others are on their way. Meanwhile, Karina continues to reflect and suggests various ideas, and using a melee weapon like a katana or another blade is a viable choice. Karina calls Dennis and Frida. They are standing nearby and hear a girl say there is a job for them. Dennis turned to Karina, called her lady, and asked what had happened. Frida noticed Karina seemed very excited and was also wondering what had happened. Frida and Dennis are 2 young people. Frida wears her hair in a ponytail, and Dennis has a distinctive, unusual appearance. Karina says she sensed a suspicious group of about 20 people in the forest and asks Frida and Dennis to join her and the others so she can confirm it. Dennis rubs his stubbly cheek with his palm, thinking a search now among 20 people is unlikely to pay off. Frida laughed softly and sweetly, noticed her partner was simply unlucky about a lucrative job, and the man apologizes to Frida, explaining that his main principle is a convenient way to make money. Dennis hopes his partner will understand. Sakura says the dialogue between Dennis and Frida is witty. It is clear they are true professionals in their field. Karina tells Frida and Dennis they will get all the details on the way. 2 new students ask about Sakura and Alicia. Karina starts her story. The guys continued their long journey. Karina says she and Sakura will lead the vanguard. Alicia should take the center of the squad. Dennis and Frida should bring up the rear of the group. Dennis calls out loudly to the man. He was surprised that, although people around him say Mr. Sakura is an ordinary merchant, he also has combat skills. Sakura was surprised by the gesture. Daichi couldn't understand why the man hadn't heard his position. The man grinned and said he was a little embarrassed to call it combat skill. In fact, the fight with the Monkey King last night was his 2nd in a row. Without warning, the man shouted that defeating the royal monkeys in the 2nd battle proved he had talent and slapped Sakura on the back to show approval. He told me not to call him Mr. because he dislikes formalities, asked me to use Sakura or Daichi, and said he understood everything, suggesting I call him simply Daichi. He put his arm around the other man's shoulder and walked away, and Dennis had once heard that Daiichi planned to open a store in the city, so the man asks Asakura to confirm the rumor. The man confirms Dennis's guesses and says that although it is his main goal, he still does not know if he will stay there. Dennis sees Karam as a good place to start a trading business because it has a large population and sits on a key trade route between the capital and the port. Asakura is pleased with the useful information and thanks the man sincerely for his help. Dennis then offers to escort her to Karama Daiichi. Dennis had his own view of the situation and hoped that when Daiichi reached Takura village, he would start selling rare goods from abroad. Now Asakura understood everything. He was only going to open a small kiosk after finishing the search. Daiichi said he only wanted to try trading items from other countries. Dennis was surprised and asked the man about the unusual car he planned to sell. Asakura Daiichi says his product lets you light a fire. Dennis nods approvingly because he'd already heard rumors about it, but the man proved him wrong. Daiichi lights another waterproof match, the flame flaring up instantly with no delay, and Dennis watches with fascinated eyes, unable to believe it could be done without magic. Frida was also surprised by the unusual trick. Karina tells the men to line up, and they head toward the spot where she recently sensed 8 people. They moved closer to the forest. When the others asked if Karina sensed anything, she shook her head. Still, everyone had to stay alert and not relax. Dennis lay in a ridiculous pose with one leg stretched up to cheer the guys, then turned to Karina, pointed out she was too restless, and tried to assure everyone he was always ready to fight. Dennis's maneuver drew no approval, and he failed to inspire confidence in this position. Asakura Daiichi stepped forward, and when Nick suddenly pulled off his sweatshirt, the pet sensed someone, dug its sharp claws into Nick's sweatshirt, and abruptly turned toward the source of the sensation. Asakura realizes the opponents are 3 hours away from them. One of them thinks that if Nick discovered someone using wind magic, he should be more careful. Daiichi wonders how to hint this to the rest of the group. Suddenly, Alicia's voice comes from behind Asakura as she points straight ahead, and with a serious expression, says there are 3 people about 5 kilometers away in that direction. Asakura exhales in relief, glad he does not have to figure out how to tell the guys about the strangers. Noticing they are already very close, Daiichi pulls binoculars from his pocket. Dennis, surprised and confused, asks what Daiichi is holding and wants to look. Daiichi explains they are binoculars that let you see things in the distance. The guy holds the binoculars out to Dennis and offers to let him look through them too. The man immediately puts the binoculars to his eyes and screams in surprise because all the objects that were far away have become very close. Daiichi leans toward Karina and whispers that he saw something shining in the bushes through his binoculars, then points to Dennis, who is still absorbed in exploring the world with the new device. The man says he was scanning the area when he spotted the glitter. It all happened because of Nick's instinct. Karina closes her eyes and prepares to give another order to her group. An unknown group is reported less than 2 kilometers away. The team has no details yet and needs to widen their search area. Dennis watches Karina through binoculars, expecting his Karina to be extremely cautious in the dangerous situation, and Frida, also very proud, confirms his view with an approving nod. Karina tells Alicia she is counting on her. Alicia is determined and ready to follow the squad captain's orders. A physical boost activates. Karina urges the group to prepare for battle. Frida and Dennis raise their shields. She asked Asakura Daiichi to take out her shield too. Asakura suddenly produces a huge shield that easily covers his entire body, and everyone is surprised by its unusually large size. Karina says it would be much better to buy a simpler shield than this, and Alicia was even inspired, saying a much stronger shield is an excellent solution because it lets you swing in all directions. The group is a little stuck. Alicia began drawing a map of the area on the ground with a stick. She explains there is a cave about 2 kilometers away from them. An unknown group of humans, or similar beastmen, lives in this cave. Horrified, Alicia is convinced the unknown group has more than 50 people and may have over 60. Not everyone reacts the same to Alicia's words. The girl says that's all she could feel. It will be hard to find out more because the unknown group is inside the cave. Dennis concludes it looks more like an underground group carrying out secret activities in a cave. Frida asked everyone not to jump to conclusions, but still agreed it looked very suspicious. Karina says there is more than enough information from Alicia and motioned for her to move away. Asakura thinks she and the guys are being too cautious, and after she says that, Frida and Dennis exchange a look before both throw their heads back. Dennis covers his eyes with his palm and says there are beastmen in the group, and Frida, doing the same, explains beastmen have a very keen sense of smell that might even reach their location. Dennis says the best move now is to step back and come back with more similar information, and they should never let anyone return without at least some information. Frida says it's commendable that they have estimated the group's size and already found their refuges. Frida and Dennis laughed loudly. They think that even a tiny bit of information can earn them a special reward. Asakura Daiichi scratched his cheek in puzzlement, but he understood everything the guys were trying to tell him. Dennis steps up behind Daiichi and lays a palm on his shoulder, asks if he knows what matters most for security. Asakura urges the man to explain, and Dennis winks as he talks about honesty. Asakura Daiichi immediately remembers saying he was from abroad, that he was on his way to relatives, and that he had been paid in silver back home. The man with the strange smile thanks him for the advice and now understands the whole point. Karina tells Daiichi they're already leaving, and Frida blows him a kiss and says she loves honest men. Sakura felt a little embarrassed and blushed, and Dennis immediately rushed over and elbowed the guy in the face while peppering him with questions about whether he had fallen in love, and the guy left the sensor at the trunk of one of the big trees before walking away. They arrived at the camp, and Asakura could not believe his eyes. Before they left, it had been bustling with life, but now only an empty field remained. Karina says everyone has apparently moved to the ancient one. Camp members are slowly moving their belongings to a nearby village. Karina sees the villagers simply watching the newcomer, while a man wonders where the robbers have gone and what they will do if they suddenly return. Karina says she and the group have no intention of fighting criminals, so everything should be in order. Dennis says there are plenty of guards here to stop an attack. The group's fighting strength is strong enough, so victory will be theirs. Because an ambassador has already been sent to the Knight's Order with a notification, their task is to stay in the village and distract the enemy until night arrives. Everything became much clearer to Asakura Daiichi. Dennis says they have a problem. There were far more enemies than they expected. Frietta suggests asking the villagers for help, but she doubts anyone will believe them. Karina looks toward the tent and thinks they should report everything first. A soccer player realizes they must camp here and tells Karina, who says they have no other choice now. They can count on the villagers' support. When Dennis asks what the village headman and others said, Karina says they must find reinforcements. Prieta recalled that the village has its own civil defense group, and Karina said it would be a good outcome if they joined that group. Dennis says they're left with no choice when they're told their village will be attacked. Karina tells Dennis and Frida to rest until evening and then return to their usual work. Frieta wonders what Mrs. Karina will do in this situation. The girl says she will take Mrs. Elijah to Daichi's Main Street. Karina's calmness instantly turned to horror because Frida and Dennis had shouted when their masters addressed Mr. Asakura by his first name, and they began to speculate. Karina held up her hands in denial, since everything was completely different from what the guys thought, and she reminded everyone that Mr. Asakura simply doesn't like formalities. Dennis notices Karina didn't address Asakura that way during the assignment. Frida agrees and suggests Mr. Karina might simply be worried about the mission. Karina was burning with embarrassment. Dennis noticed and suggested Karina might be hiding something. Karina loudly told them to stop teasing her. Dennis turns to the man and asks what he thinks. Sakura doubts it and says Karina acted a bit differently. Maybe she was genuinely worried. Asakura Daiichi felt utterly miserable and secretly wished the men would kill him. One small change in Karina's behavior immediately gave the two an excuse to mock her. Frietta rushed to Karina with hugs and kisses, trying to pull her into the women's conversation, and says she is always ready to help if Karina needs advice from her sister, but Karina refuses. Dennis also really wants to talk with the girls, but Karina gets angry and pushes Frida away because she wants the jokes to stop. Frietta turns to Asakura, winks, and asks if he thinks Karina is a cute girl. Asakura says Karina is definitely very pretty when she's worried, but the guy thinks she's cuter now. Daiichi doesn't understand who made him say that. Karina froze in confusion, unable to believe what she had heard. Frida and Dennis stood behind, holding hands, and were moved by the confession. Asakura takes Karina's hand and leads her away. He says goodbye to Frida and Dennis and explains that he and Karina still have to open a store. Karina blushes when she feels his touch. Frida and Dennis smiled kindly and told Mrs. Karina to go first, but Karina is angry and does not understand why they are wishing her luck when she and Asakura are just going to look around the store. The men are already drifting apart, and Frida and Dennis still want to have a good time. Karina thinks the men can't hear her, and she and Asakura Daiichi are still in the village with 2 hours left, while one man suggests spending today just to see how the locals react. Turning away from the man, Karina says there probably won't be any fuss because the street is mostly empty today. Noticing Karina's excitement, Alicia asks if she missed anything interesting. Karina roused herself and told her she hadn't missed anything important. Alicia stares at Karina with a hypnotic gaze, puts a hand on her shoulder, and insists something did happen, while Karina blushes again and says it wasn't anything serious. Karina suggested distracting Alicia by preparing for the store's opening, since they only had 2 hours left and could not delay. Sakura waves a hand to get Karina and Alicia's attention, wanting to share something important or signal them to come closer and see what is happening. A man walks up to an elderly woman selling goods and greets her. She asks if he wants to buy something. Sakura says he wants to offer the women some goods and asks her to spare just a little time. The man sets many medium and small boxes on the table, and the woman selling nearby takes notice. Genuinely praising the man for his excellent boxes, she says she even envies a Sakura Daiichi. As she gets older, the woman finds it strange that she grows more jealous of people with boxes. The girl beside her nodded sweetly and smiled. Sakura held out his hand and asked how the ladies lit the fire. The woman responds by lighting a fire with silicone. A girl nearby confirms what was said. Putting her palms to her cheeks, the girl exhales and says that because not everyone has even a little magic, all these magical artifacts are very expensive. Sakura smiled and offered the girl and the woman a cheap tool they could use to start a fire without using magic. She couldn't hide her surprise. Daiichi then took a match from the pack and asked her to hold out her palm. Confidently, Sakura guided the woman's hand holding the match along the box. A spark ignited instantly and ran through the girl and the woman, giving them an incredible shock. People nearby noticed immediately. Many could not understand what device had lit the flame without magic, and they exchanged surprised looks as they tried to figure it out. Karina and Alicia were pleased that the product was gaining traction and popularity. Sakura spoke with confidence, knowing his business was just beginning and that this was only the first step toward great success. Sakura spreads her arms to the sides to calm the customers who have come and tells them to stay calm, assuring them she has enough matches for everyone and no one will be left without goods. The man said he handed out the lists in queue order, so there was no point in pushing. People crowded the counter to get an unusual product that would let them light a fire without magic. After getting a box of matches, the girl lit one and was stunned, unable to believe she could now start a fire without magic because the matches were unusual. Sakura Daikai brings a large vat fitted with wooden bars and shows the girl a disposable igniter that will quickly spread fire to the firewood. She nods. Sakura realizes she still doesn't fully grasp how ignition works. A man asks to demonstrate. Daikai lights a match and drops it onto firewood he doused with an accelerant. The flame spreads to every tablet without missing one. Everyone around was amazed because they'd never seen anything like it. One of the men watched the flame race across the wood, spreading almost instantly and with startling power. Sakura says buyers already know matches can start a fire without magic, and with an incendiary, a tiny flame can quickly grow so you can light any kind of firewood. He tells me with mild regret that his products have a drawback, that all items are disposable, and customers were clearly disappointed, some even expressing dissatisfaction when they realized the products could not be reused. Sakura, smiling slightly, says a box of 25 matches costs 2 silver coins and emphasizes the product's quality, hoping the price will appeal to customers. The incendiary box contains as many as 60 items and costs only 1 silver coin. The surrounding people were very surprised. Sakura recalled the words of the head of Klaus that the residents' reaction would be exactly like that. A vendor calls out loudly and enthusiastically to the residents to sell his goods, his voice confident and energetic as he smiles and waits for a response, ready to continue trading. A gloved hand rises from the crowd as a young girl, her face set with determination, says she wants to buy both products, and all eyes turn to her as she waits confidently for an answer. Yichi gratefully thanks her after she pays for the goods with 3 silver coins and hopes the product pleases her and that she will come back. Sakura asks the girl to stay a while if she has time because he wants to show her something else. Surprised, she asks Daichi if he really has any more items. Sakura says it's not really a product but a small bonus for everyone, and the guy says it will definitely appeal to others, while the girl agrees. A man pulls an object from his bag and asks for everyone's attention to show his small bonus. Sakura removes a grate and places it on a vat of burning wood. People nearby do not understand what the young merchant intends. Sakura quickly skewers pieces of meat and puts them on the grill, and the meat immediately gives off a mouth-watering aroma. People around him began asking what dish he wanted to cook. Daichi said he wanted to make a barbecue. A shish kebab is small pieces of chicken threaded on a skewer and brushed with sauce. One customer sees this dish for the first time, and although he often cooks fried chicken, the people around him are captivated by the smell of the grilled barbecue. As far as Daiichi knows, the poor and unemployed usually eat only twice a day, in the morning and in the evening, and he thinks he still managed to spark their appetite. Sakura takes out one cooked shish kebab stick, calls the girl who first said she wanted to buy the last two, and suggests she try it first. Sakura says this is the bonus he mentioned earlier. The girl did not think joining the meal and eating would be that easy. Everyone around her watched closely, following every change in her expression. Her eyes widened when she tasted the barbecue because she'd never eaten anything so delicious. Sakura relaxed, relieved that the girl and the villagers liked the barbecue, while the girl ate everything, enjoyed the flavor, and asked what the sauce was made of and whether it could be bought. Onlookers watched, their appetite growing and unable to take their eyes off the scene. The air was thick with anticipation, and everyone wanted to join in. Everyone immediately rushed to the store to buy any product so they could taste the delicious dish. Some wanted to know if they could buy just one of the available items. Sakura loudly announces he's hosting a barbecue, and you do not have to buy anything to try it. Even if someone takes only one item, they will still get their portion. Suddenly, everyone rushed the counter. Many people thought buying 2 sets entitled them to 2 portions of barbecue. He asked them to wait a moment, explaining he was swamped by the sudden rush of customers. Taking a couple of servings, he went to the woman beside whom he had opened his shop. Sakura bows politely, thanks the woman and the girl sitting next to him for allowing him to set up shop, and apologizes for the inconvenience he caused. The woman tells Sakura not to worry since they'll be closing anyway, and the man gives them a large serving of shish kebab to show his gratitude. Grateful, the girl and the woman thanked the man for the treat with warm smiles, and he waved lightly, watched them go, then confidently returned to his work. Sakura Daiichi could only give orders because he was so tired he barely knew what he was doing, while Karina and Alicia stood behind him eating barbecue. The girl and the elderly woman finally left after saying goodbye to the man. Sakura says his story will close soon, so anyone who still wants the product should not hesitate. Suddenly, a group of men moves up to the counter from the side, mockingly noting how the man's business is booming, greedily watching him sell his entire stock and clearly willing to work too. The man realizes they are probably just threatening and asks Sakura if she can give him some free chicken. With a slight smile, Sakura says that unfortunately everything is sold out and there is absolutely no chicken left. He adds that demand was higher than expected and apologizes for the inconvenience. The men immediately grew angry, snapping and insulting him. One of them shouted that he had seen Sakura put the chicken he had just eaten into his bag. Bowing at the waist, the man tells the customers the store is closing and that he and his goods will be back in the same place tomorrow, so they can come and buy what they want. The men find that attitude toward customers unacceptable and believe they must teach Sakura how to run a business properly. 2 newcomers stepped toward the man, but a sword blocked their path right in front of them. Karina stood between the man and Sakura and glared at the intruders. One of the men pointed at her and told her she had nothing to do with the case, but he believed she should move away or she would be hurt. The man with the eye patch understood the situation was complicated because a magician from the class stood in front of them. 2 key rings labeled B and C hang on Karina's little finger. The men are stunned by the meeting and Sakura does not understand what is happening. They treat Karina like a lady and ask her what she wants if she is not involved. Karina calmly says she is the man's security detail. Her cold, blade-like stare cuts to the bone and makes men tense instinctively. They sense her unyielding determination and the invisible threat she poses. One of the men frowns and turns to Karina, asking if she truly believes she can handle 4 grown, skilled people. Grinning, the girl tilts her head toward her shoulder, making the men even more afraid, and warns that she must not be underestimated or they will regret it. The men turned back when they realized they could not trick the man and his guards, accepted the situation, and learned that all the goods were sold out, and prepared to leave, taking one last appraising look at the man and Karina. A voice from the side asked what had happened. A man with striking features and a scar sat a little higher up and asked what was wrong. One of the group brightened when he recognized Alan, saying he was surprised to see him here and could not understand how his friend had been in this place all that time. Alan says he can help the guys with their problems. The man smiles slyly and says he will be very grateful to Alan. Turning to Karina with a mocking smile, he asks if she has changed her mind about leaving her salesman boyfriend, adds that men like him rarely succeed, and asks how much longer she plans to put up with him. Karina frowns slightly, meets his gaze but does not rush to answer. Karina looked at Sakura thoughtfully, as if waiting for him to decide. Isakura, slightly embarrassed, quickly apologized and explained that all the goods were sold out and nothing was left in stock. They erupted in anger at a treatment they found humiliating and unacceptable. Their patience had run out, and they demanded only one thing: to meet with Sakura so they could deal with him properly and put everything in its place. Sakura put a hand over his mouth and pretended the men had misunderstood everything, while Daichai sneered that he was treating them like fools, and the men finally reached their limit and grew bitter. They all agreed the merchant should cover his costs as soon as possible. A group of angry men stood on the street. One had a large scar across his face. They watched a dark-haired man and a blonde woman whose hair was tied in a ponytail with a flower tucked into it. Alicia Hartland held a knitted cat in her arms while its owner, a dark-haired guy named Daichai, watched. She was cheerful and waved the cat's paws. Alan, the man with the scar on his face, raised his hand and closed his eyes, asked the guys why they were silent. The blonde man faced the group and told Alan they were wrong for not testing their strength and must be punished, and the girl with the flower in her hair, Karina, and Daichai grimaced at his words. Alan told the blonde man, who suggested punishing the guys, that he did not understand why the man had not already punished them, and assumed he was simply afraid of Karina and Daichi. When they heard it, the men in Alan's gang burst into loud laughter. The blonde man nervously pointed at Karina and shouted that he was only being cautious because she was a B-class magician, while Karina kept a calm expression and looked at her hands. Alan and his gang, who had been laughing moments earlier, froze where they stood, still in the same positions, stunned by what they heard. Alan's grin turned sinister as he says he was careless and couldn't have guessed who those men were. Alan jumped up from his seat and reached for the sword on his belt, then moved toward Karenza and Daichai and said that not only Karina was recognized as a magician here, with the gang members echoing his words. Alan and his gang smirked, drew their blades, and headed toward the other men, warning them about the upcoming battle. Karina and Daichi took up fighting positions, ready to attack. Karina warned Daichi to be careful, and Daichi said 2 armed men were approaching from the front, while another was coming up behind them, likely a magician. Armed men were heading towards Daichai. He figured that if their power was only physical, he would be fine, but if they could use magic, even bullets might not save him. Karina looks at Daichi and asks if he can handle one of the attackers. Daichai looks back at her and says nothing, surprised by her words and realizing this is the first time Karina has asked him for help, and helping such a beautiful girl only increases his motivation to beat the robbers. Daichi agrees to take on the 2 men and attacks, gripping the other man's hand with one hand as a cloud of sparkling energy forms in the hollow of the grip. Daichi shouts to Karina that he can beat 2 men. Karina answers loudly that defeating the one coming at them from the front will be enough. Alan asked ominously what the others were discussing there. Men armed with swords kept attacking them. Daichai waited for their strike. A flash of light appeared. After the flash of light, the bandits lay on the ground, bleeding and holding their wounds with their hands. The blonde man and the rest of the gang were already kneeling in front of the others with their heads down. Karina stood before the bandits with her arms crossed, waiting for them to say at least something. Daichi stood beside Karina, watching her in surprise. Karina narrowed her eyes and addressed the blonde man, who caused the brawl between the guys and the bandits. The blonde man, with a silly smile, said he had already forgotten what he wanted to say and asked the other bandits if anyone remembered anything or wanted to question Karina, but the others waved nervously and said they had no questions. Daichi walked ahead of Karina and crouched in front of the blonde man, ready to ask a question because he needed more information. The blonde man was frightened and said he was ready to answer any question Daichi had. Daichi said calmly that the bandits had received a request to destroy the goblins. The man immediately agreed. The man said he and his colleagues were registered adventurers in this city. Pointing at the other man, he added that their squads had officially accepted the request. The blonde man kept saying that, in his view, the magician Alan's party had not been given permission. Alan was in bad shape, breathing heavily. Daichi remained squatting on his haunches, hand to his chin as he looked thoughtfully at the blonde man and asked how many goblins they had caught. The man did not give a specific number. Daichi had a wicked squint. Daichi wanted the exact count of captured goblins. Terrified, the blonde man said his squad had caught no goblins. The second man, leader of the other gang, looked just as horrified and reported his squad had also caught none. Daichi thought about it. The leader of one gang, who had caught at most 1 goblin, pointed at the men wounded in battle and said those bandits had caught 11 goblins and later dealt with them. A man subdued by the attackers remained kneeling with his hands cut, and when they mentioned the goblin massacre and pointed at him among his gang, his face filled with fear and horror. Daiichi bent over a defeated man and asked about the goblins the man and the rest of the gang had killed. The man said yes. Daiichi scowled, narrowed his eyes, and demanded that the man tell him about himself and the rest of his squad. The man stepped back further, looked down, and fell silent. Daiichi reached out to the wounded man, who did not answer his question. Abruptly, he turned away and asked the other man for their names. Daiichi, a man with an eye patch and a mustache, addressed him. The blindfolded man did not immediately realize he was being addressed. Karina then stepped in and told him to talk about the members of the wounded man squad. The bandaged man said nervously that the wounded man squad consisted of 4 people. Then the man with the bandage pointed to one of the long-haired attackers, who had shoulder-length blonde hair and was a water magician specializing in healing magic. The blindfolded man told the other 2 attackers they were always ahead of the squad because they could not use magic, and they knelt, covering their battle wounds with their hands. The blindfolded man is the last to point at Alan. Magic is his weapon in combat. Sitting with his back to the others, he said nothing. Daiichi looked over the men beaten in the fight and thought they formed a well-balanced team, so it made sense they beat 11 goblins, yet he still had doubts. Daiichi stood to his full height, raised a hand, looked around, and asked the people nearby if everyone had received the request to destroy the goblins in the village of Torreno. The blindfolded man with a mustache raised one hand and said he and his squad, along with a squad of defeated magicians, had just received that request. Daiichi pictured the bloodthirsty monsters and asked the blindfolded man why they had managed to avoid goblin attacks so far. The man said that in the 10 days they had been in the village, they had seen no goblins. The blindfolded man kept saying it seemed a group of magicians had appeared in the village, and 3 days later the goblins arrived. Daiichi replied to the blindfolded man that they were lucky to have left the village before the goblins attacked, otherwise they might have been hurt. The blindfolded man agrees with Daiichi. Daiichi turns away toward the vulnerable men, and the water magician shifts Daiichi's attention. Daiichi spoke to the defeated magicians and asked how they had managed to beat the goblins, whether their story was true, and if so, how many goblins there had been. The water mage said they went straight into the forest to look for any monsters as soon as they reached the village. The water mage remembered the forest and said other squads had reported no goblins for over 10 years. Believing monsters might be hiding, they went to search the forest's deep thicket. Daiichi wondered if the mage squad had found the monster lair. The water mage closed his eyes and shook his head. Daiichi watched him, thought for a moment, then fell silent. He glanced at Karina, and she glanced back at Daiichi, who was watching her. Karina turned away abruptly. Daiichi had his hand on his chin, and after Karina turned away, he closed his eyes. Daiichi called for silence and asked the men what they should do with them going forward. Karina stood nearby, looking down at the ground. Weapons were piled together. The men discussed whether to hand the squads over to local authorities, or, if the squads reconsidered their behavior, let them go. Men from the detachment heard the announcement about liberation, and all shouted in unison. Karina was annoyed by the noise, while Daiichi was mildly surprised by what was happening. Karina turned away from the cheering crowd and said they had to go. They needed to tell Klaus and Jeffrey everything. Daiichi kept his eyes closed while Alicia stood beside him holding a cat named Nick. Daiichi eyes the water mage with suspicion as he sits silently, head bowed to the ground. Daiichi kept his eyes on the water magician and thought the words might be true, because with a squad of magicians, they could defeat the goblins and search the bowl of the forest for them. Daiichi moved away from the water mage, still finding him strange and doubting the magician's story, and he was very worried. Even while walking with his back to the water magician, Daiichi kept his eyes on him and thought the magician did not seem like someone who would easily reveal everything. The magician looked up and fixed his gaze on Daiichi as Daiichi walked away. Karino followed an elderly man through the campsite, with tents and lit torches all around. My husband said that before bandits attacked the village of Torreno, 2 squads hunted goblins. Karina went to the company head with new information. The older man glanced at her, shifted slightly, and asked what she felt while she was there. An elderly man entered one of the camp tents, and Karina lifted the tent flap and followed him, warning that a group of 4 magicians had a very dark aura and that she would not trust them or the other adventurers. An elderly man set his hand on the wooden chair back, began to push it away, and asked Karina what she thought of the agreement between the bandits. Karina said cautiously that she and the others should be careful. The elderly man sat in the chair he had moved earlier. An elderly man sat at a table with a small lamp, stroked his beard, and asked if Daiichi had really discovered all of this himself while Karina stood in front of him. Karina remembers Daiichi as cheerful and welcoming to everyone, and while discussing with an elderly man the time he set up a kiosk to sell goods, She thought his idea was connected to the incident in the village of Torreno. The old man placed his hands on the table, rested his chin on them, and said he would send his people from the bar tonight to find out more. This should not be placed by Daiichi. Angry, Karina bit her lip, immediately bowed to the elderly man with her eyes closed, and apologized. The old man picked up the cup, and she said Daiichi had really tried to contact the squad under the pretext of organizing a kiosk, which no one else could have imagined. The elderly man looked up at Karina and asked whether the adventurers had noticed it, since their actions seemed very suspicious. They remember the interrogation of the Daiichi bandits. The elderly man says he is not afraid of the bandits attacking the village, but fears they will attack his caravan on the road. Karina listened quietly to the elderly man, watching him as he said there was no point in digging deeper into their problems, then closed his eyes and remained seated at the table. The older man looked up at Karina again, brought his hand to his face, and asked her opinion of Daiichi. Karina replied with a serious expression that Daiichi was extremely conscientious. Karina recalls Daiichi turning his back on her and says that besides his magic he is wise, very knowledgeable, and clearly better educated than she is. An elderly man shuffled coins on the table while listening to Karina, who said he could do calculations in his head without paper or pen, and he did them quickly and without mistakes. The elderly man brought a glass of liquid to his lips and said he had also noticed Daiichi's skill at calculating, adding that not even every experienced merchant can do the mental arithmetic and sign contracts so quickly. Karina remembered being in the forest with Daiichi. She wanted to practice attack magic, and Daiichi agreed to calculate the distance required to defeat. The result from his formula surprised her, and when she finished, the elderly man was equally surprised. The elderly man frowned, touched his face, and asked Karina if she remembered how the calculation formula looked, and Daiichi did. Kina looked at the man and said she did not understand it and would not be able to remember it. Karina pictured Daiichi doing calculations. His methods seemed complicated but were only approximations. In her eyes, he looked like a university professor. Karina then remembered that when Daiichi was tired or fed up with calculating, he would pull out a measuring device and use the strange tool to measure the distance to a tree. The man listened to her in surprise. Lifting his glass to his face, the elderly man said that Daiichi, in his homeland, belonged to the royal family or was of aristocratic blood. Karina clasped her hands behind her back and cut him off, saying Daiichi could be the wealthy, peaceful heir of a noble family or just a spoiled son. The elderly man took a sip from his glass and, surprised, asked Karina why she thought that about Daiichi. Karina's face took on an odd look, her eyes narrowed, and she said that Daiichi treats everything lightly. Karina narrowed her eyes and furrowed her brow, saying she did not think Daiichi could solve problems because others always handled the troubles around him. Karina remembered how Daiichi had performed on stage. Alicia stood before him with a pleased expression. After finishing her story, Karina stood motionless, her hair barely moving. The elderly man set the cup on the table. Karina suggested raising Daiichi's response level. He was surprised and interested in Karina's proposal. With a serious face, Karina said Daiichi should be watched as closely as secret royal aristocrats or heirs. The elderly man closed his fists, fingers intertwined, curious about why Karina had made that offer. Karina faced the man, lifted a hand, and warned that even for their country Daiichi was too dangerous, because he wielded first-class magic without attributes, and his bag held many strange items they had never seen. With a tall scarf pulled over her head, Karina continued, saying that Daiichi is highly educated and can find a way out of any situation by using his surroundings and other people. Karina remembers Daiichi's image, his hand pointing forward, a cluster of magical energy forming in his palm, and objects like a machine gun, a light bulb, and a mobile phone around him, so he can take control of the country. Hirna's face went anxious, sweat trickling down her cheek as she closed her eyes to think, and kinda clasped her hands behind her back before saying that Daiichi could end up ruling a more magically advanced country. Karina looked wary again. She narrowed her eyes and said that Daiichi's influence in their country might be too strong. After hearing her, the old man put a hand to his face and sighed deeply. Frowning, the elderly man said in a menacing voice that Karina was Count Crusher's daughter, part of the royal faction, and that she would do anything to defeat Daiichi. Karina realized the man's words and frowned, her face twisting with anger as she shouted and stepped toward him, then stopped at the table and leaned on it with her hands, while the man stared at her without moving, and the tent felt heavy. Then he spread his arms, smiled, and told her that everything he'd said was just a joke. Karina's eyes filled with anger and her brow furrowed, and she warned that because of the current situation in the kingdom of Yendorf, this joke could be deadly for an elderly man. The old man looked away and scratched his nose, then said that if you ignore Daichi's high status at home, two rival factions might start fighting over his goods and knowledge. Karina lowered her hands and said the faction that sided with him would gain more influence. Then Karina put her hands behind her back. A dark castle stood behind her, and she went on to say the most disturbing thing was that Daichi could be led away in another direction. Rubbing his mustache thoughtfully, the elderly man rolled it between his fingers, gave Karina a menacing look, and said they had to do everything possible to prevent Daichi from leaving for another country. A group of men walked through the city, surrounded by houses and tall trees. Daichi brought up the rear with a sword slung across his back. Daichi threw his arms behind his back and, surprised, asked the guys why they had gathered like that. One of his companions, a dark-haired girl with her hair tied in a hyponetil and wearing gloves, turned to Daichi and smiled as she asked why he did not like her company. The girl with the ponytail stepped close to Daichi, smiled, and said it might be better to have someone like her on the team. Daichi sheepishly agreed. Smiling, the girl pointed at the short-haired man Dennis and said that if Daichi did not like Dennis, she could scold him and they could put a girl on the team in his place. Dennis crossed his arms and looked angry. The ponytailed girl kept saying that instead of a middle-aged man, it was better to have beautiful girls on the team, and they introduced 3 smiling girls, one with dark hair, one in uniform, and one wearing a helmet. Daichi flushed, scratched his cheek nervously, and turned down the offer from the girls and the team, while his cat Nick peeked out of his shirt, and Alicia smiled behind him. With a confused look and a faint flush, the girl with the ponytail told Dennis he was very lucky Daichi agreed to keep him on the team, leaving him speechless and blushing. Karina turned slightly to the men and said they must stick to the plan and ambush the bandits. Karina turned to face Daichi and told him that Dennis and Frida were B-rank magicians. They could fight in melee and at range. Daichi walked at his side. Wooden roofs flashed past him. He realized that magicians of that rank were as strong as Karina. Daichi looked at Denayas and Frida and thought Karina specialized in wind magic, and if the guys had strong offensive skills like fire magic, they could be stronger than Karina. Daichi praised the guys, and they were surprised by his words. After a moment, Dennis broke into a smile. Scratching his prickly chin, he felt flattered by Daichi's praise. Smiling and blushing, Phryne said the entire Bertram Company's security consists of magicians above the D category, so she does not feel anything special. Daichi and the others stayed outside, and he turned to them and said he did not fully understand, since he had heard Bertram's guards were very strong. Neighbors from the wooden houses around them stood nearby, while children played in the street. Dennis said cheerfully that to the world, they were just an ordinary security company. Walking in front of the group, Perino said without turning that when it came to battle, Dennis was becoming a pro at mass attack magic that could scare the enemy. The guys followed and listened to Karina. Daichi was exhausted. He closed his eyes and darkness filled his sight while rays of light came from him. He began to consider running away from the others. Frietta said it was the most effective way, and Dennis said she had no reason to doubt it. Karina stopped by a building and stared at a barrel hanging from a chain. A man stopped a short distance from Karina. At the corner of the house, a barrel hung from a chain as a sign for a bar. Karina told everyone to stop talking. Surprised, Daichi looked up as a knitted cat popped out from under the neckline of his shirt and growled angrily. Nervous, Daichi watched the cat, trying to work out why it was angry, while Alicia stepped over and waved her finger in front of the cat's face, also curious about its reaction. The cat ignored everything, growing angrier and meowing loudly. Daichi thought Nick might have detected bandits in the bar using spirit magic. He warned the others that there might be bandits in the bar. Daichi, Karina, and Nick's cat were talking. Karina asked Daichi what he understood about bandits from the cat's reaction. Daichi winked and agreed with Karina. Smiling, Karina raised her hand and said that at this rate she could easily handle the task if they found bandits in the bar. Dennis went in first, followed by the rest of the guys. They saw a small tavern with a staircase to the second floor. On the first floor, several tables were filled with men drinking from large mugs, some clinking them, and plates of various foods sat on the tables. They went inside. Dennis looked around and licked his lips. Karina went second as Daichi tried to handle everything, but stayed in the restaurant while the others hung back. Karina studied the place closely, and something off to the side caught her eye. Scratching her head and squinting one eye, she said she had found the ones they were looking for. Daichi looked at her, surprised, and stood behind her. In front of the group stood the men they'd already beaten earlier. 4 of them sat at a table by the stairs to the second floor, drinking from large mugs and eating, while a girl in a headscarf and apron walked past. Alicia approached Daichi, told him he was doing well, covered her yawning mouth with her hand, and added that it was a good job. Daichi looked at the leg of a bandit sitting at the table and noticed a hole in his pants with no wound, saying the bandit had already been healed. They remembered the dark-haired bandit lying wounded on the ground. Karina said a magician who used Valo magic had been with those bandits. He could heal that kind of injury in a couple of minutes. Daiichi showed the two wounded men he had drawn. With his hand on his chin, he said it would take a couple of minutes. Karina said the wounds she caused could heal in 3 minutes. Daiichi told Karina he thought they could just go to the bar and pose as customers drinking, and Karina closed her eyes, lowered her head, and said that was no longer necessary. Dennis slumped down with a gloomy look and said he really wanted a drink. Freedom smiled, patted the dejected Dennis on the back, and said they could buy some alcohol and wait for them outside. Dennis took a large jug from an elderly, mustached man, while Karina and a hooded man stood by the cart on the street. For men the guys had been waiting for left the bar and walked away. Karina watched the bandits walk away from the corner and said they had left the village. Dennis and Alicia approached Karina, and Dennis asked why the bandits were heading toward the forest at that time of day. The group kept following the men as they walked away, and someone said they did not need to enter the forest to contact their own. Dennis and Alicia Karina peered around the corner. Karina said the bandits' contact was probably hiding in the forest, so they went to him to deliver a letter with news about the village. With a grin, Dennis rubbed his nose and said that Bertram's guards were smarter than he could have imagined. 4 men walked through the dark forest, one with a large sword on his back, and another said that if the adventurers fail or the plan goes wrong, they will call for reinforcements. A group hides in the bushes with Karina at the front and the others behind. They look around, and then Alicia notices something. Alicia said sharply and wearily that someone was hiding in the grass. Dennis and Karina turned to her. Alicia and the others set off, moving cautiously through the forest as she called for everyone to follow. A group of men spotted a grassy patch, and Alicia and the others hid in it, with Alicia saying it did not look good while Daichi stared in surprise, trying to work out what was happening in the distance. Alicia said in a serious voice that if you believe what the bandits said, then one of the vigilantes is passing information to them. Squatting down, Dennis said that when adventurers gather to hunt monsters, it's normal for the party to get information from locals. Frida, sitting next to me, said there are many gaps in the locals' knowledge. Daichi looked at Dennis, wondering how strong the monster hunters were. Dennis replied that goblins cause a lot of trouble when they gather in packs. Goblins are pretty stupid, but their numbers let them overwhelm someone. Smiling, Frida said they were exploring the territory alongside the hunt. Daichi grew wary and realized his guests were real, and that if the monsters were stronger than goblins or unusually numerous, more armed forces would have to be sent here. Daichi placed goblin puppets with weapons in their paws, continued to think that the goblins threatening the village were no more numerous than the people who could defeat them, and began to understand the plan to attack Torin. It showed images and descriptions of bandits setting goblins on the villagers. The villagers turned to the guild for protection, while the bandits mingled with adventurers to see if they could defeat the villagers. Alicia told the others the bandits were not after the whole village, but intended to defeat Bertram's company and rob the village from the opposite side. Daichi thought the plan to rob half the village and avoid being caught by Bertram's company was too suspicious. The bandits stood in the middle of the field and met another group of men. Kina said they really didn't know about the possible ambush. Alicia replied they were all on the lookout. Karina knelt and asked Alicia to make it so everyone could hear what the bandits were saying, and Alicia agreed and closed her eyes. A bandit's voice surprised Daichi, and it kept saying that Bertram's caravan was in town and the vigilantes were acting suspiciously. Daichi was stunned by Alicia's ability. Karina said Alicia used wind magic, so the others could hear the bandits' conversation. A bandit said the vigilantes had been forgotten in the village. 2 groups of bandits were talking. A scarred bandit said they were interested in the situation in the village of Torin. The others were surprised by this. Daichi and the others stayed in the grass, listening to the bandits negotiate. One bandit said it was the same village they had robbed last time, and the others agreed. The dark-haired bandit with a hump on his nose said you killed everyone that time. Daichi's face grew stern when he heard that. Another bandit said that after the village incident Bertram's group still had not moved. The bandit with the humpiness face said it was too early to tell, and the bandit beside him asked what they would do next. Frida and Dennis strained to listen and squinted as a bandit said they were lucky Bertram's company had gathered here, and the bandit with the crooked nose said they would hit the jackpot this time, much more than they had in that village. The guys crouched down and keep watching and listening to the bandits' negotiations. Quietly, they rejoiced and reassured one another. The bandit with the scar on his face remembered the meeting with Daichi and Kaina where they were defeated. He tensed and said he had already warned that the guards were very dangerous. The bandit with the crooked nose said only 2 of the guards knew how to fight. The one with the scar replied that being only 2 did not make them less dangerous. The rest of the bandits stood silent. Left alone with a crooked nose and a smirk, he said one of the guards was a B-class magician, reassured the others that everything would be fine, and since the 5 magicians from Rhonda were already here, 5 dark silhouettes stood nearby. When they heard this, Daichi, the cat that had come out of his bosom, and the others were very surprised. Daichi grew afraid and thought these bandits were on the same level as his group. Karina frowned and said it would not be easy. Karina told the others that she had gone to report those bandits. Daichi, holding a cat in his arms, and Alicia stood behind her, smiling foolishly. Daichi jumped when someone called his name. Alicia smiled and asked him to tell her about his parents. The girl shouted that Daichi owned revolutionary theology and world-class inventions. Daichi stood beside her, confused. Her outburst frightened him. He nervously agreed with her words. Daichi looked confused as he considered telling Alicia the truth, since he did not fully understand the so-called technologies, and they were just ordinary goods. Crossing his arms, Daichi realized he had to come up with something to tell Alicia to distract her and make her forget her question. The kitten yawned and Daichi had an idea. Daichi said he had information for her. Alicia looked at Daichi and was pleased by his words. Daichi shouted that cats are very popular in his homeland. When he pointed, the cat pricked up its ears, and Alicia opened her mouth in surprise. Daichi and Alicia kept talking about how popular cats are in Daichi's home country, while the kittens sat next to the men and watched them. Alicia said she loves cats too and can see why they're popular, but among the guys here, cats are less popular. Daichi insisted cats are extremely popular, and Alicia went along with him. Daichi showed an image of a man bowing to a cat and mentioned a cafe, telling Alicia that every 10th person in his country owns a cat and that there are cafes where cats are celebrated. Daichi remembered social networks where people upload cat photos that get lots of likes. He explained to Alicia that if a cat picture was shared, it could spread for miles. Daichi shouted that in his country cats have many different traits, and many items are made as cats, including cat houses and t-shirts with cat images. Shocked by Daichi's story, Alicia was filled with delight and could not believe that objects could take the form of cats, so she crossed her arms over her chest near her heart. Alicia said enthusiastically that she understood the appeal of cat products but did not understand one thing: why people give ordinary objects the shape of cats. Daichi laughed and began rummaging in his bag. He had a handkerchief behind him, and a small torch was lit. Daichi pulled from his bag slippers, a watch, and a mug decorated with seals' ears, tails, and muzzles or just their outlines, saying that after one look you won't be able to resist. Seeing it, Alicia cringed with delight, clenched her teeth and blushed, and could only say one word: cute. Daichi kept talking about cat-like objects, mentioning plates, pillows, adapters, and cat shapes, and Alicia answered each time that it was very sweet, though she did not know what an adapter was, and to her everything was sweet. Delighted, Alicia fell to the ground, and as she stood up she said she understood what Daichi meant, that cats were meant to be cute. Alicia eased to her feet, barely able to stand, and said she expected no less from the Daichi homeland, which produced not only advanced technology but also simple household goods, while Daichi stood to the side and smiled. Alicia lowered her head and wept, then cried out that she should make tools shaped like cats, since she had always wanted to create magical tools but had never thought of it. Daichi put his hand on Alicia's bare shoulder, tried to calm himself, and told her not to worry. Alicia was on her knees, and Daichi dropped to one knee, still holding her shoulder. He warned her not to copy this, since it might stop new ideas from coming to her, and as a creator, she is equal to the creators and inventors from Daichi's homeland. Daichi grew distraught and suddenly shouted that Alicia had lost, and it was a complete failure. The cat sat next to him and scratched his muzzle with his paw. Alicia looked at Daichi enthusiastically. Daichi kept shouting that she should now enjoy the cats. Daichi stood behind Alicia, opened a tall door before her, and a dazzling light poured out from the opening. He told her she only had to open the door to a new world. Alicia looked at him and said eagerly that she would do it. Alicia approached Daichi and told him he needed to teach her, and he cheerfully said he would if she relied on him, though he found it hard to fool Alicia and was growing a little tired of it. Daichi continued telling Alicia about cat traits and showed her a soft cat paw. Alicia did not understand the object, and Daichi said it was a device you could always use to crush a soft cat's paw. Daichi then showed a cat carrier Alicia had never seen, and when he revealed the cat inside, she covered her mouth in delight because she recognized Nick. The cat got out of its carrier and was wearing clothes with bells. A cellist did not understand why the cat was so cute. The cat bent its paws a little and rested its head on them. Wings appeared on its back, then it turned backwards. A robot cat appeared holding a tray with a drink, and Nick the cat sat beside it and looked at the robot. The robot cat greeted everyone, and Daiichi said technology plus cats. Alicia waved her hands and insisted that Daiichi show her more cat-related items. Daiichi shouted that in that case we were moving on. Alicia now had seal ears and paws and her clothes had changed, and everyone began shouting that she should feel like a cat and be cute, so she panicked and joined the game. Daiichi told her she needed to start meowing. Alicia covered her mouth with paw-shaped gloves and said it was too embarrassing. Daiichi's face and eyes looked cat-like, and he told Alicia to say meow at the end of the app. Alicia twitched her gloved hands like cat paws, opened her mouth wide and meowed, then arched like a cat. Daiichi said with enthusiasm that Alicia was doing well and was very sweet. Alicia sat on her lap with a tail and paws on her feet. She put her hands to her face and kept meowing. Daiichi kept praising her. Alicia changed into cat pajamas, a one-piece jumpsuit with a hood and ears, and kept meowing while Daiichi watched, crying with delight and emotion. Delighted, Daiichi started shouting that Alicia was doing well and that they needed to keep this up. A serious Karina appears behind the enthusiastic Daiichi, shocked by what is happening. Daiichi and the others sat in ambush, eavesdropping on the bandits' conversation. He judged the 5 to be B-ranked magicians. The bandit with a hump on his nose smiled, flanked by 2 assistants, one taller and the other much shorter, and Daiichi saw why they seemed so confident. The scarred bandit said he had fought the guards himself and had something to report. 3 bandits stood behind the scarred man. The scarred man said they should wait until the guards left. Daiichi was surprised to hear the bandits' words. Laughing, the leader of the 3-person gang asked if the man with the ball feared the guards, and the man said he did. The hook-nosed man was surprised by the truthful answer. The scarred man said the girl was dangerous too, and at least he understands how she defeated them, but he has no idea how the other man did it. The image of Daiichi appeared before him. The scarred man frowned and said the only thing he understood was that Daiichi had hit him in the leg with a piece of lead. The hook-nosed man scratched his face and said it was probably earth magic. Recalling Karin and Daiichi, the bandit said that if it had been a magic projectile, his magic armor would have stopped it, and added that the attacker used something other than a magic spell. One of the bandits shouted that 2 of his colleagues had their legs blown off in that fight and blamed that man. The other man replied that it was their own fault for letting their guard down. Dennis began to assume that the bandits who appeared in the village were only 6, and Fried sat next to him and thought about his words. The man with the scar on his face said he was wasting his time, shuffled his feet, and kept saying they had to tell the guys in the village everything. 3 men turned away and began to leave. The last said the final decision would be made tomorrow and asked him to pray to the other bandits to cancel the raid. The man agreed, and then I heard a noise and he turned around. Karina told the guys they had to go. The crowns of the trees showed the newly planted trees, and then the gorge and the cliff appeared. The gorge was full of bandits who surrounded a stack of barrels built against one wall. They all turned to look at the same spot, and among them stood a one-eyed cat as tall as a human. The man with the crooked nose said Eli, and his team had taken the task too lightly. They fought a female guard and a man who defeated them. A sturdy blonde man with a short beard in the crowd asked if he was sure that one of the guards was a B-ranked magician and crossed his arms to wait for an answer. He replied that there was only one magician there, a girl wearing the Magician's Guild badge, and another dark-haired man asked if the man they had met was really stronger than the magician of that rank. The man with the hooked nose said Elaine had noticed the boy too, and he thought the boy was stronger than he looked. They exchanged looks and began discussing the next steps they intended to take. The hooded man warned that if those men were from Bertram's company, they'd cause them a lot of trouble, and the 3 men stood in the building in silence, thinking about what was happening. Many bandits stood listening to the negotiations, and one said there were enough of them to defeat those men. The other men began talking, doubting their own abilities. They feared the others were magicians. A dark-haired, bearded man in the ranks told them not to lose themselves or start threatening others. A blonde, bearded man shouted for everyone to be quiet. The dark-haired man and the man with a scar turned toward the shout. A young man sitting behind the others said with a cheerful grin that if the vigilantes moved, it did not mean Bertram's company would help them. A man winked at a blonde, bearded man who told everyone to be quiet and said the winking man had already prepared a trap for them. Pete sat on the floor, leaning on one of the barrels. He said the head of Bertram's company was going with the caravan and suggested setting traps for the vigilantes in advance, giving the task of luring them there. Crossing his arms, the blonde man said the vigilantes were guarding the north gate and Bertram's caravan had stopped at the south gate. The other men stood silent and listened. The hook-nosed man said it was all right because Alan had told them so. Pete introduced the attackers and smiled as he said that if they attacked from the north gate, Bertram's company would rush to their aid. Debating their next move, the men planned to grab whatever they could before reinforcements arrived or confront the vigilantes. Since there would be little of value there, Pete looked at them in surprise. The men began saying that, unlike before, the village now had many young girls to have fun with. The talk did not stop. The blond man was serious, convinced that nothing would work out between them. The blond man was lost in thought. The plan wasn't perfect and had many nuances. He considered the obstacles that might arise and their solutions. The men kept making noise while they planned an attack on Bertram's company to seize the riches in its wagons. A dark-haired man with a beard growled that reinforcements for Bertram's company were impossible because they were too strong. The bandits fell silent and pondered. Pete rubbed his chin with his finger and said a magician of that rank could be a major problem for them. The blond man asked Pete what he thought of the whole situation. Pete remembered Alan's face. Pete said Alan was too scared, so his opinion should not be taken into account. Pete stood, arms spread, and warned that anyone on Bertram's team is an excellent fighter, so to limit damage, you must avoid a direct collision with them. Pete opened his mouth a little, stuck out his tongue, and rested his hand on his chin. He said they needed to organize a surprise attack. The blond man looked at Pete, surprised, and asked how Pete planned to pull this off. Pete kept his arms outstretched to the side as the bandits all stood and stared at him. Smiling broadly, Pete clasped his hands and said they would easily defeat the Northgate warriors. The bandits exchanged looks of triumph as Pete narrowed his eyes and said they could defeat the vigilantes if they went to ram. Pete showed the little man he'd drawn and said that if the vigilantes focused on defense, they would defeat them quickly. Pete said if the vigilantes only defended themselves, the bandits could start looting the village. They raised their fists and weapons into the air and cheered at the coming victory. Pete closed his eyes and smiled, convinced the opponent would act as it suits you. Pete stood with his arms outstretched and said the vigilantes were not fools. They would probably gather all the residents together to protect them, most likely in the center of the village. The man with curly hair said if they got rid of the vigilantes, people from Bertram's company who stayed in the village itself would take their place, and the hooded man and the man with a scar on his face looked at him and listened. Smiling, the curly-haired man said that in this case, the foolish vigilantes would split their forces. Pete grimaced at the remark and thought the curly-haired man was the only stupid one here. Pete hunched into a half-box and said the vigilantes would focus on defense. Crossing his arms, he told the blond man they had to buy time before Bertram's company arrived to rescue them. The curly-haired man wanted to know what was stopping them, so he decided to steal from empty houses until help arrived, then go to the village and leave right away. Frowning, the curly-haired man said he doubted Pete's claim that Bertram's company would arrive before they could leave the village, and that only a fool bent on robbery would fail to get away in time. The curly-haired man folded his arms across his chest and shouted to me that they were no fools and would be able to leave in time, and the bandit behind him agreed gleefully. Pete covered his face with his hands and dropped his head, feeling indignant and unable to understand why he was surrounded by such fools. The curly-haired man worked it out in his head and said that by the time Bertram's company sent reinforcements, they would already have left the village with the loot. Pete showed the village's empty houses and said evacuating would leave no money or supplies in the homes, waste time, and leave the people with nothing. The curly-haired man turned to the hooded man and said it would be easier to attack Bertram's caravan. The hooded man picked his nose while listening to the band's reasoning. Pete closed his eyes and an idea struck him. Pete gestured and warned that attacking Bertram's company would put them up against Bertram's men, so they should avoid it because those men are much stronger than ordinary vigilantes. The curly-haired man stepped in front of Pete and warned him not to approach the rams since they might suddenly attack, and Pete clenched his teeth and his lips twitched. Then Pete smiled, put his hands together, and said they all think alike, while the curly-haired man looked embarrassed and agreed. Pete drove past the curly-haired man and addressed the rest of the bandits, suggesting the company would leave some forces in the south and send others to the village center as guerrillas while the bandits listened attentively. Pete explained the attack plan to the others and showed the painted men. In the north, the bandits attacked the vigilantes. In the south, Bertram's company and the man in the center were there. Partisans from the company went north to help the vigilantes. Pete smiled, raised one finger, and said that once the vigilantes were gone, the villagers would lose faith in salvation and only have to deal with Bertram's company. Pete walked around saying they could surprise and rob Bertram's company before the knights could reach the vigilantes. The bandits saw the wagons full of unguarded wealth, and one said that if they attacked Bertram's company, the residents would have time to escape and hide, while the other replied that the residents would most likely hide in the wagons. The bandits kept talking and agreed to the plan. A blond man looked at them and said the attack on the vigilantes was a ruse and that Pete intended to tell them. Pete raised his hands and smiled, saying the blond man was right, which alarmed the bandits and made them glare at Pete. Pete's face changed into a sinister smile as he said he would now reveal the real plan they would stick to. The bandits were scared while the blond man grinned. They waited for Pete's plan. At the same time, a fist slammed on the table in one of the village houses, an elderly man shouting angrily, and the two men flinched when they heard it. An elderly man rose from behind a chair and spoke in a threatening tone. People surrounded him. It happened in the village headman's house. A meeting was held about bandits. The bandits were hiding within the adventurers' main group. A man was rearranging knights wearing helmets and carrying spears, and at the meeting they discussed two issues. First, what to do with the information about the bandits, and second, how to secure the village until knight reinforcements arrive. The old man concluded the bandits' information leak came from near the village of Takura, and they most likely used the same tactics on them. Daichi thought about it. Daichi, Alicia, Frida, and Dennis sat at a table with Nick the cat on it and mugs and a jug nearby. Daichi put his hands on the table and lay his head on them. Daichi buried his face in his arms and said they would agree to the plan they had made at the general meeting. The diagram showed a high wall around the village with exits only to the north and south. Vigilantes and adventurers guarded the north, and the company guarded the south. Daichi introduced the little men and said they could repel any attack. Part of the company would be sent to the center of the village. With a detachment there, the guerrillas could support both the south and the north and even spot bandits slipping through the walls. Daichi said they are evacuating civilians in the north and south to reduce possible damage and placing them in shelters. Daichi plans to propose the plan to Bertram's company. He remembered the elderly man's stern face, and the bandits posing as adventurers will guard the north gate alongside the vigilantes. Dennis raised his hand and said Daichi was not afraid the plan might fail and leave them with nothing. Daichi looked at Dennis and thought that was a sensible view. Calmly closing one eye, he said the villagers could not come up with anything better than their plan, and even if they did, they would not have time to put it into action and would have to accept the man's plan. Daichi opened his mouth slightly. Frida's frank story surprised him. He and Alicia heard something and looked away. Frieda said she thought it was time for them to go. Dennis got up from his chair, his hands on the table as he moved to the head. The brick corridors were illuminated by light coming through the windows. In one corridor, the guys met Karina, their boss, and another man, and she warned them in a threatening tone that they must stick to the plan. Daichi, Alicia, Karina, Dennis, and Frida would stay with Santa Claus at the south gate to prepare for a bandit attack. The rest of the escort squad will be stationed in the village center under Captain Jeffrey, a dark-haired man with several facial scars, and they will be ready to assist any party at any time. They ordered everyone to prepare to fight back immediately, and the men agreed. Soldiers ran through the camp among tents and wagons. One tent, different from the others, stood off to the side. He sat in the tent holding a plastic water bottle and a gun, unsure how strong the bandit's magic armor was, and considering that his weapon might not cause fatal damage. Various firearms lay beside Daichi, and he wondered which caliber he should take. Daichi pictured himself in a military uniform with weapons in both hands, but realized he still could not tell which bandit was a level B magician, so it would be a mistake to fire at everyone. Daichi opened his laptop and played a video on how to shoot properly, thinking he could attack everyone at random at first, finish off anyone who remained later, or put them all to sleep with gas. A cat distracts Daichi by bringing him something, so he takes a bundle, notices several different weapons lying beside it, and assumes the cat brought it to play with him. At that moment, he heard voices behind him coming from a walkie-talkie on the table, and Daichi was startled when someone on the other end said the plan was fake. Daichi turned to the table and the walkie-talkie, which kept repeating that their real target was Bertram's company. Daichi kept looking at the radio, grinned at what he heard, apologized to the cat, and said he would play with him a little later. The cat sat watching Daichi after he turned away. Daichi stood at a table with a walkie-talkie, sweat running down his face, scared when he heard the plan was fake, while the cat stood beside him and looked at the table. Voices on the radio kept saying the vigilantes were an easy target and that they would really act differently. Pete said with a cheerful smile that their real goal was Bertram's caravan. They would still have time to attack the village, and the chance to ambush the caravan might not come again, so they should not miss it. The blind man said their real purpose was the caravan's cargo. Pete said the cargo is also important, but he wants to capture their leader. A bandit asked if anyone had seen what Bertram's head looked like, and Pete pointed to the dark-haired man, Joseph, saying the two of them knew what it looked like. Pete presented the painted man to the bandits and told them the plan, that they would send one of their men who would deliberately lose a letter describing their scheme, and the adventurer at the North Gate would find him and learn the plan. The men raged, saying that once the company learned about the letter, it would immediately send its troops to the vigilantes. Another man said the company would likely just increase its presence in the village center. Pete beamed with happiness. Pete thought they would likely move their forces to the center and leave the main henchmen beside them, so he raised his hand and said those who stay next to the leader will be strong fighters who will be able to defeat any enemy. Furious, the curly-haired man jabbed a finger at Pete and said Pete had himself praised how strong Bertram's guards were and was now urging the bandits to attack and fight them. Pete smiled, closed one eye, and said that if he and the three men standing behind him did this they would definitely win and could handle it if they had a blonde male boss with them. The hooded man said they had not faced strong rivals for a long time and warned Joseph to be careful not to burn them down. The men then began swearing and threatening one another and were asked to calm down. A few bandits stepped aside and rejoiced at the plan, determined to win. The five wore evil grins and were unlike the others because each was a real soldier. Pete raised a finger, squinted, and said they needed to use them to feel more confident. The other bandits all turned and looked the same way, their eyes fixed on the depths of the gorge where the terrible sounds came from. It was too dark to see anything. Some bandits peered into the darkness, frightened. One bandit said they'd use their trump card so they would not regret their defeat later. The bandit leader reached out and said everything was decided, so Alien and his men would be told to attack the North Gate tomorrow night, and I was ordered to write and send a fake letter. The bandits moved and spread around the cave, while their leader insisted a letter include every small detail and shouted that the attack would start tomorrow night. Crouched on his haunches with his chin in his hand, Daichi listened intently to the radio. The bandit said, as Pete had warned, they would attack that night if the others hurried to gather. Someone asked Daichi if they could come into his tent. Daichi was caught off guard. Karina said Captain Jeffrey had intercepted information about the bandits' plan, and the boss wanted to discuss it with Daichi as soon as possible. Daichi replied he would be there soon and put his phone in his pocket. Inside the leader's tent a torch burned nearby, and the bandits' letter lay inside, and the leader raised his hand and said the bandits were going to attack tonight. Daichi and the others looked at the head and listened as he showed a letter, and said a patrolman had detained a suspicious adventurer who was carrying a note addressed to the bandits who had entered the village. The head said with a serious face that the bandits had probably discovered the partisan detachment in the center of the village. The leader frowned and said the bandits aim to kill the vigilantes and will move quickly to seize the northern gate. Painted men clearly revealed the bandits' plan. Their leader said they would be the next target. The bandits could not defeat everyone at once. The bandits planned to deal with each person individually. Dennis said this was the real bandits' plan. Frida said the plan would fail without a good leader, like in the army or the knightly order, and watched the boys' conversation thoughtfully. Men stood around the table where the leader sat. Dennis asked the leader why he had gathered them here. The head of state slammed his hand on the table. The leader shouted he would not let the bandits do as they pleased. The partisan detachment had already been notified and was on its way to the vigilantes. He urged the men to go to the North Gate to help. The men listened to the chapter with fascination. Dennis pressed a hand to his chest and said he would carry out the order, but he asked what the head would do then. The head said he planned to stay with the merchants. Karina said she wanted to stay with the head. The boss leaned back in his chair and crossed his fingers. He said the company's staff would protect him and there was nothing to worry about. Dennis told the head it would be easier for the men to fight if they knew the head was safe. Frida said the head should accept Karina's offer of protection. The leader waved his hand and said there were 5 mages of that level in the bandit group, so Karina's absence could hurt the battle's outcome, and Vichy, remembering the bandits' radio talks, understood their plan. Daichi suddenly rushed up to the head and shouted that the head had to hear him before making a decision, and the head asked whether the conversation was urgent. Daichi insisted the matter was urgent and that the South Gate must not be left unguarded. The head grew angry and could not see how those words should change his decision. Daichi places a gadget on the table in front of the head and says that if the head listens, he will immediately realize that everything the bandits came up with was a hoax. The head looks at Daichi and the gadget in surprise. The gadget began to make noise. A voice said they had to deliberately give false information about the attack. Another voice suggested they should lure Bertram's company straight into a trap. The men were stunned by what they heard. Leaning over the device, he heard voices discussing the plan and how to carry it out, and he could not believe a human voice had come from it. Frida covered her mouth with her hand in surprise. Dennis kept his eyes on the table. Karina held her head while Alicia smiled cheerfully, and Daiichi picked up the device and said this was the bandit's true plan. The head opened his mouth slightly and asked what kind of tool Daiichi had brought. Changing his mind, he said that detail was unimportant. He still did not understand how the device had produced the conversation or how Daiichi had gotten it. Daiichi says that while they were in the forest south of the village, behind the bandits about a kilometer from here, they left their device. The head froze at what he heard, and Daiichi added that the conversation had taken place recently. A loud shout announced someone was coming, and everyone, startled, turned sharply in the direction the screen had come from. A soldier runs into the leader's tent where he and his men are, and says the northern gate is under attack and a battle is underway. The men turn to him as he keeps shouting that they have launched a signal into the sky. Rapley's leader rose from his chair while Daiichi watched. The leader rested his hands on the table and thought about how to proceed. Daiichi raised one hand, closed his eyes and lowered his head, then said he had a plan. Pointing to an object on the map, Daiichi says they are using the bandits' own strategy against them, and with a serious face, adds that everything is actually very simple. Daiichi clearly presented his plan using figures drawn by a man, saying the bandits would come from the south and his men would outflank them, and set a trap on the way between the southern forest and the gate. Daiichi pointed to the map. The others watched his movements closely. He assured them everything would work out. The bandits should believe everything is going according to their plan. Daiichi introduced the little men and said the group had to convince the bandits that all the southern forces had been redirected to the northern gate. Hichi said he, Karina, Freed, Dennis, and Alicia would stay with the caravan, while the masked civilians will go north instead. The leader stands in the square to make it look like he alone is guarding the gate, acting as bait while the others slip around the bandits and attack them by surprise. Daiichi said cheerfully that even if the surprise attack failed, it would buy enough time for the headclaws to reach the center of the village. Angry, Karina slapped the table and warned it was very dangerous. Daiichi replied calmly that the bandits would attack, and soon there was no time left to talk about the risk. Kaina said the bandits were heading for the south gate and suggested bringing everyone back. Dennis crossed his arms and said it wouldn't work. Frieda touched her chin thoughtfully and said the bandits would arrive before help. They believed they could meet the bandits in the village center to buy time before the squad arrived from the north. Karina said that if the vigilante stayed at the north gate, the company's forces would be strong enough to defeat everyone. Karina raised both hands in the air and said happily that she was right. Dennis said Karina would be right if the only thing to worry about was the fight. Frito stood beside Dennis, and the two of them looked at Karina. He leaned in, frowned, and listened to the guys. Frieda said she believed the head would not approve of Karina's plan. Daiichi shut his eyes, bowed his head, and folded his arms, then said they could draw all the bandits to the village center, but their true aim was to kidnap the head of Klaus, which surprised Karina, and he reminded her about the civilians who had not evacuated from the south. The mood around Karina changed. She had become depressed. Karina stood with clenched fists and her head bowed. Daiichi turned and looked at Karina. The man stood before Klaus's head and wondered how likely they were to defeat the bandits. Daiichi broke the silence and said he had a secret weapon. The clan leader gave the men a menacing look, his fingers clasped in front of his face, and said Daiichi's special weapon could defeat 60 bandits, including 5 magicians of rank. They wondered whether Daiichi knew mass destruction magic or had a magic tool with similar effects. Daiichi paused, tightened his lips, and said he could get the bandits to leave without killing them. The men around him stared in shock. Dedicated Klaus did not understand how this was possible. Karina slammed her fists on the table, pointed at Daiichi, and shouted that he was no kind of bandit and needed to stop being so frivolous, while Dennis put his hand out in front of her to hold her back. Dennis pushes Karina back and steps in front of her. Karina does not understand what is happening. Dennis says no one could simply believe Daiichi could deal with the 60s bandits. Frowning, Dennis said it sounded even more incredible that the bandits could have survived that. Raising a finger, the head said he agreed with Dennis. He wanted to know how Daiichi planned to carry it out. The head waited for Daiichi to explain. Daiichi reached into his bag and said he didn't want to reveal the secret weapon yet, then pulled out an item, held it near his face, and said it wouldn't work without it, so he would explain everything to them now. Daiichi revealed a secret weapon. No one was near the headscarf, and several torches and another handkerchief lay nearby. The village lay quiet. A river ran behind a stone fence with a bridge and a house beside it, and beyond them were only fields, while Daiichi and the others stood outside waiting, and Alicia had been suspended from the upcoming operation by the head's decision. Alicia objected to the head's decision, saying it would be more practical to use attacking magic outside the village, and Klaus then backed down. Glancing aside, Daiichi thought Alicia's specialty was ranged spells. Karina told him he was absolutely sure the plan would go smoothly. He turned his head to Karina. Daichi turned and said he hadn't fully convinced them, but if the leader decided the plan was too dangerous, they could leave him and he'd finish everything himself, and if the plan failed, he'd launch a massive rifle attack. Peering behind Daichi, Alicia startled him. She smiled as if she would help him if he failed and cast a spell. Only Karina's screams broke the street's silence. She said she would not let them be left alone together. They replied that without him, they could not complete the second part of the plan. Karina held out her hand and said she would stay with them to the end. If the plan's second stage failed, she frowned, insisted they would all leave together even if she had to carry the others, and abruptly turned away. Daichi nervously scratched his face and smiled, telling Karina not to worry so much. Dennis touched his face and said he had heard of Daichi's talents, but he could not understand how Daichi stays so confident. Fried smiled and said that no matter how strong or weak the enemy is, you should never let your guard down. Karina said with displeasure that Daichi is a high-class magician but has no combat experience. Daichi was surprised. Kaina touched Daichi's chest with her finger and said that talented magicians had sometimes been killed by minor bandits because they lacked experience, and they all had one thing in common. Karina made a face and said all of these magicians were overconfident, and Daichi looked at her, surprised and thinking it was tough. Daichi raised his fist to his face, coughed, closed his eyes, and said that in his homeland they say if you know yourself and your enemy, you need not worry about the outcome of 100 battles. Karina looked surprised because she didn't understand the saying. Alicia stood behind her and smiled. Daichi turned away from Karina and said that if you know your own strengths and your enemies, you will win even after hundreds of battles. That is what the saying means. Alicia admired Daichi's erudition, and Karina, standing behind her, said she grasped the general meaning of the saying. Daichi raised his hand and said they knew the enemy's plan, which was their main advantage, so they used it against them. Karina objected and said she understood him, but that he was still careless while the guys were talking. Daichi spread his hands and felt the others did not believe him. They seemed to see him as a naive boy. Though inexperienced, he insisted he had enough knowledge. Daichi realized he had read many different books, including history books, and his knowledge of military strategy was far greater than a typical student's. Daichi kept thinking this was his first fight, but he wasn't afraid and looked forward to testing his skills. Serious and calm, he trusted his ability to think clearly, and startled Alicia said they had come. Alicia shouted that the bandits were a kilometer away. Karina drew her sword and called for everyone to get ready. Alicia needed to put on protective gear. Tensing up, Daichi thought that a kilometer away they could only wait for the bandits to get closer, and Alicia noticed something. Alicia shouted to the men charging into battle that, in addition to the bandits, 6 royal monkeys and bandits with monsters were rushing at them, and Daichi grinned while the others were shocked by this turn of events. Karina and Daichi turned and rushed to Alicia, closed in to see who was controlling the monkeys, and noticed the monkeys moving. Daichi recalled that someone controls the royal monkeys because they are used in battle. Karina pointed to the forest and said there were 66 bandits in total, 6 of them royal monkeys. Karina looked toward the forest and said everything was bad. Dennis shouted nervously that there were more bandits than they expected and 6 more monkeys with them. Frida said they needed to retreat. Karina tensed. Alicia shouted that the bandits were accelerating, with Karina standing nearby. Surrounded by magical sparks, Daichi said he would stay to detain them and told the others to inform the leader, confident his plan did not depend on the number of opponents. Karina turned to Daichi, furious, and insisted he wasn't talking nonsense. Daichi smiled and said the number of bandits didn't affect his plan and that he needed more shells. Karina opened her mouth in shock and stared at Daichi. Alicia said she would stay with Daichi. Karina and Daichi stared at her, mouths open. Alicia said her offensive magic would be useless in the village, then smiled and added that with magic to strengthen her body, she could easily keep up with Daichi. As squad leader, Karina insisted everyone should follow her. Alicia cut in, saying the bandits were 700 meters away. The news made Karina flinch. They said they wouldn't budge at that rate, and Karina and Frida stood beside him. Karina clenched her fists in anger and shouted that she would stay with the boys and that Frida and Daichi should stay to help them. Frida drew her sword and Dennis said they were counting on Daichi. Smiling at the others, Daichi gave a thumbs up. No one was yet visible on the road into the forest. Alicia reported the bandits were already 600 meters away. The team took up combat positions to prepare for the attack. She raised her hand and Daichi saw it as a signal. Bandits closed to 500 meters. All the guys stared at Alicia's hand. She curled one finger, leaving the other 4 extended. Daichi stroked the cat peeking from his jacket. Alicia's hand showed 3 uncurled fingers, then 2. Bandits were already visible in the field, moving toward the group, and their faces came into view as they drew closer. Daiichi gritted his teeth. With 200 meters left, he could already see their faces and feared he might not get a weapon in time if the decontamination plan failed. Alicia had only one finger left uncurled as the bandits moved into range. They all closed their eyes and covered their ears with their hands. Daiichi stretched out his arms and activated his power. Grenades started raining down from the sky. All the bandits looked up at the grenades falling on them at once. They were surprised by the sight. Stun grenades rained down from the sky, temporarily stunning them. A bright flash lit the bandits. Pete, the curly-haired man, and the other bandits are hit by the grenade and lit by a blinding flash. Daiichi turned away from the flash and shut his eyes and ears. After the explosion, he opened his eyes a crack and stood to see if the plan had worked. The bandits clutched their eyes and looked dazed, with some standing motionless and others lying on the ground trying to recover, and the royal monkeys lay on the ground too. Facing the bandits, Daiichi smiled, while Karina stood with her hands over her eyes and ears, and he tapped her back to show she could already look around as balls and spinning lights descended from the sky and the bandits lay on the ground. Dennis watched in fear, unable to understand what had happened. Frito looked toward the field, wondering if the bandits were lying there. Karina glared at Daiichi and demanded to know who he was. Daiichi looked back at her and stood perfectly still. Daiichi spread his arms and announced it was time to capture the bandits. Daiichi led the others toward where the bandits were huddled. Karina followed Daiichi and stared at him intently. Daiichi thought the man still needed more time to adjust to what was happening. While showing his equipment, Daiichi realized he had to limit the bandits' foresight by using the network. Using magic, Daiichi said he needed to stay safe.